Hello, family and friends. Welcome to another Talks with Liem. Today, oh gosh, I always f this up. This is
a tradition now.
Every time. This podcast is available to the billions around the world on YouTube in 4K and also in audio on Pandora, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, CastBox, Podchaser, and all the other platforms.
Can you post on LinkedIn? Do they do podcasts?
I actually have short clips on LinkedIn. I don't know why I'm doing that there. I'm just testing it out for fun. I'm your host, Liem. I'm a software engineer. I've been doing that for almost 2 decades. And today my sidekick is...
Emmett Morgan. I am a dude in Las Vegas. I'm a local realtor. I'm a fan of the future, as you can see from my SpaceX Falcon Heavy t-shirt.
I did not know what that is. I should have.
Yeah, well, I mean, people think of rockets as penis shaped now. This is barely phallic at all. So I'm a believer in science, but sometimes stories are important. So we brought on a very intelligent and thoughtful. I don't know where you found this guy, but I like him a lot. Joseph, can you explain to our audience what you do and what you're thinking about these days?
Sure. So currently I'm teaching at the University at Albany in the program in Writing and Critical Inquiry, which is fantastic. I get to interact with all the undergraduates and always keep my wits kind of sharp. They do a great job of that. And I'm also hosting the Neutral Ground podcast as well, which is, you can find that on Apple, Spotify, or you can just go to my website at theneutralgroundpodcast.com to learn a little bit more about that. And yes, I am incredibly fascinated with the pull of historical movements and how they shape the way we interact with each other. So, gentlemen, where would you like to begin?
So we spend 3 hours talking about neo-modernism was a big topic, postmodernism.
Yeah.
We talk about the factual history that led into those labels.
And Thor,
Marvel.
It's true.
We talk about the complications of people's, I guess, psychology.
No, we talk about why Thor shouldn't have been a fat Lebowski.
And we talk about how to fix it, which you people need to stay tuned to find out what Joe's answer is on that.
Don't be depressed.
All right. Anything else that I missed, guys? Any other interesting topics?
Yeah, we went all over the place. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Audience, stay tuned for this fun talk. Cut.
You left out cannibalism.
That's
okay,
true.
Now cut. Thank you for taking this opportunity and accepting my request to be on this show. I'm actually pretty excited for this conversation because you, as a literature professor, if I have that correct, and then when I listen to your podcast, you talk about things like neo-modernism, but you connect World War I, World War II. I find that pretty interesting. I don't know if we want to dive into that as the first topic.
Oh, is there a historical context to your literature studies? Is that what we're going into?
Either way, however you guys want to start.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch to unpack here from the beginning. I would say just to do some quick kind of background work here for the audience. So essentially the way I set up my current research, what I'm kind of looking at now, this idea of historical movements and how they shape the way we interact with each other. The way I try to describe it even to students at times is think of major historical movements as like rubber bands. Mm-hmm. And the further we get into that movement, the further we kind of stretch that rubber band back. And eventually, of course, it's going to just kind of snap. Now, when that rubber band snaps, let's say at the end of something like the Enlightenment, right? Mm-hmm. So you're thinking late 17th century, going into the mid 18th century, a little bit later in America at that point because of the Revolutionary War. When those rubber bands snap of major historical movements, there's a kind of a really big, you could even say almost violent at times, adjustment period that takes place where we as a species try to figure out, okay, so what were we lacking in the previous movement? And how can we kind of get that back in the next historical movement? So most people who think of the Enlightenment think of it as an age of reason. Okay. But then ask yourself this, as just a human being, how long can you live your life as a human being who's just thinking? just rationalizing everything. If you rationalized everything in your life, how enjoyable is that? I mean, so the rubber band snaps.
Are we talking about Hamburger Helper or something else?
Oh, you're speaking my language.
I enjoy Hamburger Helper.
If I have to rationalize Hamburger Helper, I'm not eating it, right? And that's why I say, forget it. Hamburger Helper is not an Enlightenment food at that point. But what invariably happens is we value rationalization so much in the Enlightenment. When it snaps, people start saying, I need to be something more. I need to feel something as well, have a kind of emotional connection to things. And thus you end up in Romanticism. And Romanticism is very much an age of emotion and at the same time, a kind of pushing back against pure rationalization as well. Okay, but then again, you ask yourself the same question. And this is really the only question you have to ask to understand historical movements to a degree. How long can the human being be a purely emotional being before you just kind of go, I can't feel anything anymore. I'm done. Right? So
those relationships last about 3 months.
I mean, what happens, right? You end up like the toddler who's having a tantrum in the store. And have you ever seen, I mean, sometimes it can be funny, actually. If it's not your own kid, it's kind of funny. What does that toddler end up doing? They kind of burn themselves out, right? Emotionally. And so at the very end of the tantrum, they're just kind of like, right? That's what happens essentially at the end of Romanticism. It burns very brightly. Now, when that rubber band snaps, and we're kind of making our way here to neo-modernism. When that rubber band
is Shakespeare
snaps,
in the Romanticism period?
Shakespeare's in no. Shakespeare, you're thinking about kind of Renaissance period, and this is what we would call. You have pre-modern or pre-modernity, and then you have what we call modernity, which is not the same thing as modernism, which we'll get to that in a second. Modernity sort of indicates the time of, I would say, just pre the Enlightenment, 1600s, where Shakespeare is right around actually getting into that, right in there, right?
But, so back then they thought they were modern.
Well, don't they all? Think about it. Right? Don't we all, right?
I mean, they were,
200 years from now, people are going to be looking at things that we said and going, didn't they think they were modern? That kind
Dumbasses.
of idea. But you have modernity, which is this kind of concept of when we started thinking of ourselves individually as sovereign beings, capable of kind of governance, of self-governance to a degree. Right. That's why we began talking from the age of Enlightenment, because there's a whole set of scholarship. One scholar, Charles Taylor, he's been talking about this for a long time. He sees one major problem that we have today is that we still haven't dealt with the problem of consciously being aware of our own responsibility, our own sovereignty, our own freedom, in a sense. And so that line of demarcation between modernity, again, roughly, age of Enlightenment, and what happens before that, there's a very good case to be made that you can start thinking of your historical movements really at the age of Enlightenment, because that's when we really start to form, I think, the majority of our problems that we start seeing.
Oh, so before that, we were just farmers and we didn't have modern problems.
Well, think about it. What's your concern? You're in the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages. Yeah. You tell me, is your concern your freedom in that way? Or is your concern death, plague, destruction? Do you have time to think about?
Don't stab me because of some crazy church stuff.
And that's a very real problem, is the problem of it's a good, fortunate problem, let's say, that we start in roughly, again, late 1600s with modernity. We start being able to figure out things like medicine better. We have longer lives. We have fewer deaths that kind of just happen, let's say, miraculously. They just happen. We start to understand things better.
Yeah,
And
that
because of
trend
that,
continues through to today. Yeah.
Absolutely. So there is, again, there's a good case to be made for that line between thinking of we now have modern problems versus as opposed to just the problems of as a species level.
Yeah. So
trying
everything
to
you've said so
exist.
far makes sense. Do you mean in a historical sense or in a literature sense? Are we talking about literature or are we talking about history or both?
Well,
or
it's all
Yeah.
connected, right? Because literature in many ways chronicles the thoughts and the patterns and the ideas of what's going on around them. And great literature, and there is such a thing as great literature and bad literature.
Yeah.
Great literature chronicles. Oh, go ahead.
Also,
What?
something on your podcast I thought was interesting when you connected like the superheroes in literature as more superheroes, and during that history, why people are writing about superheroes. So, sorry, just throwing that in there.
No. You're fine. Absolutely. Yeah, totally. You know, I interrupt whenever you want. Quite honestly,
Yeah.
this is, this stuff is all exciting to me always. Literature or great literature will always speak to some kind of universal value of the human condition, and that's what makes it great. Truly, it's why you can read a text from pick whatever age you want. I mean, I go back as far as usually Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia. I was just going there. Absolutely.
I don't even know where that is. Yeah, I was just.
Yeah, that's modern day Iraq. Modern day Iraq. Gilgamesh. There's plenty to learn even from that story, and it truly is fantastic. There are psychological elements to it that make us think about. He's at one point he's walking down these layers of a dark cave, and here's the greatest, strongest man in all the world, and he's just screaming. And it's because he's left with himself, and he can't just throw or beat himself. So right at the very beginning, one of the earliest pieces of literature we have, we're already starting to deal with the psychology of the self. It's phenomenal, quite honestly. So literature always chronicles to a degree the greatest struggles, the triumphs, the worries of humanity, and it's always connected to history.
Yeah, see, I think what was messing me up was I always think of literature as broadly fiction, like somebody made up a story or wrote a story, versus history being just a recording of facts. And the way you explain it makes sense that those stories, those fictions are planted in those times, are rooted in those values, are connected to those people.
A reflection of that moment.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
If I'm understanding you correctly, yeah.
Yeah, and there's even, and I got to get this just right, but even someone like Edgar Allan Poe, who, people know him usually for writing his kind of spooky stories and things like that. But he has a philosophical piece called Eureka. And in that piece, he's trying to work through a problem that's astronomical, like from astronomy. He's questioning, with the amount of brightness that's out in the sky, why is it that it's so dark? And believe it or not, that led to a discovery of astronomy through astronomy, where people actually looked into this phenomena and wanted to know, hey, why is that the case? And that's one of the ways that we learned about the kind of end of the reach of light in space. Because there's a certain point where light cannot go any further. We can't see any, like there's a part of the universe that actually is literally like, you might as well say it doesn't exist to us, because we have no means of seeing it. Nothing.
Yeah,
and that comes out
14
of
billion light years.
Yeah. So, literature, fiction, nonfiction can all kind of help chronicle and think about ways that we live, that we interact with the world around us.
Can I ask you this? Like, Edgar Allan Poe is certainly famous now, well regarded. In his time, was he widely read? Did everybody read Edgar Allan Poe stuff back in his time, or is that not how it works?
Poe, it's funny, the rock star image and the troubled man image, there is a lot of truth to that, but there was also a gentleman named Rufus Griswold, and he was a publisher, and he didn't really like Poe that much. And when Poe passed away,
don't trust anybody named Rufus Griswold.
when Poe passed away, he kind of wrote the definitive kind of story on Poe, and that became the truth as we know it for us, this incredibly troubled, soul, which he did. I mean, look, every woman that he loved basically passed away on him.
Oh.
And I don't know anyone who can deal with that. And so he had, you have these incredibly strong women, thinking Morella, Berenice,
kind of suspicious.
You have all these strong women in his works. And usually there's some kind of supernatural element to them as well, right? My lost Lenore from The Raven, even. And so it makes sense when you think about that he himself was struggling with this in real life. These lost women in his world. Poe was exceptionally good at marketing himself, and so he would go to these, especially these women's clubs, and he would read for them, and they of course loved him. He was incredibly charming. He was.
Well, plus if you're losing wives all the time, you got to go get a new one, right?
I mean, it's rough. It's a rough,
go where the chicks are hanging out.
So so it's like kind of like, yes, I would say, I mean, by our standards today, we couldn't measure it in followers like we can today, but he probably would have gotten a lot of likes in his works today. Yeah.
Yeah. So would an analogous person today, would that be like a Tom Clancy or a Stephen King? Is that the same kind of thing in literature, or is that different? Is it just popular reading, or does it have these heavy implications that you're assigning to past works?
That's a great question, and here's why: because it's still very much what we struggle with today in terms of what is great literature versus what is just what everyone wants is reading. They've had that problem forever, and no one probably understood that more or hated it more than Poe himself. There are things that he would write because he had to make money. And so he would do that. And in some ways, I think you could even make the case that The Raven is that. He would go and he would perform The Raven for people. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weekend weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore.
He's a fucking sellout.
but they hated it. They hated it. I mean, they absolutely did. And the other author who hated that even more is Herman Melville, who wrote Moby Dick. He even he had a story called Bartleby the Scrivener, in which people have read this autobiographically. At a certain point, this character Bartleby, he just has this wonderful line where he says, "I would prefer not to." And he'd been doing a great job as a copyist for a law firm this whole time. He was the best employee.
Yeah.
And then one day the boss says, "Bartleby, come in here and read this copy with me." And he just says, "I would prefer not to." And the beauty of that language, he's not saying no, but he's also letting you know, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
And people, of course, read that as this kind of autobiographical thing of Melville saying, "I would prefer not to write these stupid stories that will sell.
Yeah.
I would prefer to write these great things, these great works of art that tackle meaningful events." But when Melville did do that, because he had a lot of early success, Melville, having had a story of jumping off of a whale ship and living among cannibals, that story, of course, sold great, and he became a rock star. And then when he wrote his first really philosophical piece called Marty, people were like, "Uh-oh, Herman Melville has gone crazy." And in his mind, he thought, "No, this is the most sanest thing I've ever written.
Yeah,
this is fantastic
who wants
stuff.
to live with cannibals? That's not a good life." That ends badly.
So, yeah, they struggled with it too. I mean, the best-selling work of the 19th century, unless I'm mistaken, is The Lamplighter. Not some great text that we think of or study today. I mean, it's a good story, but it's the best-selling stuff was all what we would consider today to be almost like, not romance novels. That's a bit too far, but
Harry Potter.
Generic, very generic stuff. Yeah.
So is there a contemporary literary writer that is putting out some awesome stuff that is just not popular in our century, in our current day? Is there literature that we're all missing out on because we're too busy watching Netflix?
Oh, I'm possibly the worst person to ask that, because I'll tell you the truth.
It's my books.
my PhD is in early American lit from roughly about let's say mid 1600s. I try to meander my way all the way through World War One. I don't love postmodern work stuff after World War II, but there are things that I can talk about, obviously, that I like. And then literature of today, I struggle with quite a bit because a lot of times I find that they'll write for a message and forget the craft. And it was always kind of the opposite for early American stuff. It's mostly the opposite. It's let's highlight the craft of what we're doing and let the message come out of the craft. And so that's why it just doesn't speak to me as much today. However, I do, I do like the poetry of, his name is Ocean Vuong. Ocean Vuong, and he's still writing poems today. He's pretty young, actually. He's I would say a neo-modern artist.
Yeah.
And I find a beautiful cadence in the poetry and a nice message as well. So you get a good mix of the craft and the message.
Does he have a Vietnamese heritage? That last name.
Yeah, I'm trying to recall. I'd have to look it up.
We'll look him up.
Sure.
What was his name? I'll look it up.
Ocean, we're coming after you.
Okay.
Yeah,
right, you guys continue talking.
Vuong, I think.
Okay, that sounds very Vietnamese.
Yeah. I wonder if his parents named him Ocean or if he as a poet decided, I need to become Ocean.
That's a fair question.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you're going to be a poet, you might as well go down that road.
Yeah. But he has one beautiful poem called Someday I'll Love Ocean Vuong. And it's a beautiful poem because it's kind of self-reflective on not so much who he is, but it's a self-reflective of where he wants to go. And it's done with a beautiful craft in mind. And that's what I appreciate about it.
Does he tweet?
I don't know.
I'm
not really on Twitter.
1988, so hopefully maybe he's part of the new generation of TikTok and whatnot. But Vuong Huc Vinh. So Vinh is his first name.
Yeah, totally Vietnamese.
So then I don't know the translation of Vinh. I'm not sure. I don't know the translation of Vinh. So I don't know if that translates to ocean.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Oh, that's true. A lot of Vietnamese names translate directly to like moon or snow or.
Is that right?
Yeah, a lot of Vietnamese names are pedestrian when you translate them.
Yeah, and they're sometimes unisex also. Even like my name Liem is means integrity, so that could be a female or a male's name. But a lot of the names in the Vietnamese culture can be unisex also.
Yeah, but you two really lucked out, though. I mean, you've got Ocean, which is fantastic, and integrity. My goodness. I'd be saying that all the time. I'd be telling people as I introduce myself, I'm Liam, but you can call me Integrity.
Dude, that's awesome. I might use that sometime.
I'm just Joe. That's it.
What about your friend Rainwater? He doesn't like that?
It's a great name. It is.
Nice. Wasn't there a famous World War I poet that did poetry about war? My dad was always quoting him. He's got to be the most famous World War I war poet.
World War I poet.
Yeah.
I tend to stick to prose a lot. Is what I do. So like I deal a lot with Hemingway. I'll deal with T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot, Eliot's poetry deals with World War I in a little bit of a tangential way, but that's another poet that I even the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, which is a fantastic poem.
Did you say Poop Rock?
I didn't, but I wish I had. No, it's just Prufrock. The love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. And he has one of my favorite lines where it's this poor guy, he's trying to figure out, what happened to his youth to a degree. And one of his lines is, I measure out my life in coffee spoons. Oh. And I love that line because, I get up every morning. And one of the first things I do is make coffee.
Yeah.
Here I am with the coffee spoon. I'm going, oh boy. Yeah. This is where I am now at 41. I'm measuring my life in coffee spoons.
Yeah. Does that speak to a mundane repetitiveness or?
Yes. So in World War I, you're dealing with modernism is the movement there, historical movement. And modernism is about a redefining of the human condition in some way. So we've got the atrocities of World War I, and that truly is a war that we had never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And it became so easy to kill human beings en masse, like in huge masses.
Yeah.
And so the effect of that, the psychological effect, was twofold. One, it prompted us to rethink what is a human being, right? You get the updates to the Geneva Convention that happen after that, where we go, whoa, we can't do this again. This is not good. And you also have the added effect of shrinking the story of the human being. So you don't get big stories in modernism. Instead, you get stories that are just about like a single man or a single woman trying to deal with something. And so here you've got Prufrock, J. Alfred Prufrock, who's just telling you about how, you know, his life is measured in coffee spoons, and he's, you know, I used to hear the mermaids sing. I do not think they sing for me. He's done, like, they're no longer, the allurement is no longer there for him.
Wait, what happens at the end? Is this a depressing story?
Not for me. I think it's great. But it could be, I suppose it could be read in a depressing way, I suppose, right? Because you reach a certain age where you have to come to terms with whether or not culture is speaking to you anymore. Right? Like, for example, even with me, I'll use this as a joke with my students, but like, I'll always ask them, so like, what are you listening to these days? Give me some musicians to listen to. Yeah. And I'll go home and I'll actually listen to them.
Megan Thee Stallion.
Well, was that one of them? I forgot who it was. Last year, a student gave me
Bunny.
gave me something. And I went home and I listened to it, and I came back to class the next time and I said, I'm taking 5 points off of your average just for making me listening to that. I mean, that is horrible what that was, you know, and they laugh, you know, because I'm the old man in the room, that kind of a thing. But in truth, right, I grew up on 90s hip hop, R&B, you know, not a lot of rock actually where I grew up, but, you know, that kind of segment. And the music today, those mermaids are not singing to me.
Naughty by Nature is not putting out new albums?
Oh, no, not anymore.
Tony is a...
Hey, if I had no loot, that's great stuff. I mean, like, you know, Tony, you could do a lot worse, right?
Nice.
Yeah.
Is this where we wanted to go? Is everybody happy with this direction? I'm just asking questions that because I find it fascinating to get a chance to talk to
I think it builds kind of a good foundation for us to kind of understand Joe. Like there's the books and literacy and whatnot, and then also you're connecting things like World War I, World War II, United Nations. So I think it connects it all quite well. Maybe I want to ask, like, so what's your definition of neo-modernism, and then let's kind of unpack all that as you go forward.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to define, because this will help connect here. I'll define something that most people can't stand, which is postmodernism first.
Okay.
And if you've ever tried to look up what postmodernism is, usually people come back really frustrated. And that's because postmodernism, by its very nature, avoids being defined. But yet, I'll define it with one word. Postmodernism is about skepticism. And it's skeptical of any kind of grand narratives that attempt to define something, define a way of being. So, for example, something like religion, which often, you know, is a grand narrative that says this is the way you should live. This is the way of good and bad and all of that. Postmodernism looks upon that as in a very skeptical way. Now, when you get to the latter half, I'll say it this way. It's very in fashion today for people to hate postmodernism. Matter of fact, routinely you'll hear people say, all of our problems today are because of postmodernism.
Is there a time frame for postmodernism?
Yeah, you could say it's roughly the end of World War II. And then after that, it's a little bit of a dispute. I would place it at probably the end of the 90s, moving into the early 2000s.
Oh, we're talking about the boomers.
We're starting to get consciously aware, I think, or subconsciously aware of neo-modernism in the early 2000s. And I think now we're basically fully aware of it. We just don't know what to do with it.
Yeah,
and the reason why that's important is because, again, that rubber band thing, how long can you live a life of pure skepticism with no bedrock to believe in anything? So by the time you get to the end of the 90s, postmodernism has to die, because we're just done with this kind of this idea that I can't find firm ground on anything anymore. Nothing. We could agree on nothing.
Yeah, but now we have Wikipedia.
Even that, right? You know what I used to do too was great until they fixed it. I used to go into the classroom and talk about Wikipedia, and I would change the Wikipedia page for like the presidency. And I would say that like Dr. Meyer ran for president and lost by like 10 votes.
Yeah.
And then I'd go into class and say, see, if you try to say that, use this as a source, it's saying that I ran for president. Did I run for president? No.
Yeah, so we just talked to a Wikipedia guy that's in the, I don't know what you call it, the community that oversees it. And apparently there's a lot more oversight and...
yes.
Yeah, so it's gotten better, I think.
It's gotten great. About 3 years ago, I had to stop because it would change by the time I walked from my office to the classroom. They would fix it.
Wow.
And that's why I had to stop using that, because
Stole your trick.
Can't do it. Yeah. They knew it. Yeah. But even something like that.
I'm
right?
imagining you typing it in and then trying to get to class quickly.
That's exactly what happened. I would, okay, go. Right? And try to make it. And I couldn't do it. But even something like Wikipedia, right? Could you imagine, Wikipedia works really because we want to have some kind of stability, actually. We want some kind of central place that when I look up, I don't know, something about, let's say, Queen Elizabeth II, I can find some kind of agreeable narrative on Queen Elizabeth and say, okay, that's enough. Well, that's actually a very neo-modern concept, because out of that instability that we have in postmodernism, that rubber band snaps, and now in neo-modernism, we're looking for narrative reassurance, some kind of stability again. But there are pros and cons to that, because your narrative is not going to be the same as mine.
Yeah.
And so that kind of contentiousness, I think, that we feel today when we discuss things has a lot to do with this neo-modern problem of building narratives.
In your perspective, what's the benefit of labeling postmodernism and neo-modernism?
The benefit is because people always say, or will sometimes say, yeah, but we have skepticism today in neo-modernism, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that has nothing to do with it. It's not as if when you leave a historical movement, you leave all of the ideas behind. You don't. You take a lot of those ideas, continue forward with us. And so, for example, we have very enlightened thinkers today. We also have things like romantic heroes from Romanticism, and we have modern thinkers as well, modern poets. So, in fact, labeling them, what it does is it allows us to say today, are we dealing with a communication problem between postmodern skepticism and neo-modern looking for narrative reassurance? And if we can do that, I think we could probably, at the very least, tone down a lot of our problems today in terms of communications.
Yeah, I was thinking in another way to word it. I feel like it's kind of like either a philosopher or a psychologist trying to pinpoint where the root of the problem is, versus if we don't define it, label it, then we have no idea what we're working with. We're just reactionary.
The problem is people suck.
I think that's usually a problem, but
well, yeah, I mean, we take this stuff, so there are three, or at least how I see it. I see three major traits emerging out of neo-modernism. The first is the looking for narrative reassurance because of that instability or destabilization we have in postmodernism. The second is finding ways to transcend the body. Now, you might have noticed there's a lot of talk of things like meditation, psychedelics, prayer, all these different ways to try to get out
Ayahuasca.
of just, I mean, yeah. But like you just said, though, is that a new thing for us? Like, did we just invent psychedelics in the past 5 years? That's thousands of years old.
Yeah.
And even in the 60s, they were doing studies on psychedelics, like major studies. So you have to ask yourself, why is it that all of a sudden in the past like 5 to 7 years, this has become a really big thing? It's because when you have that destabilization of narrative, which, by the way, is so important to us.
Yeah.
Narrative has been the way that we've moved forward in life as a species. We tell stories and we create stories to make meaning. Out of that destabilization, we're trying to figure out, okay, can we be more even than just our mortal form? And that's where, Liam, you mentioned this earlier. We've also had superheroes for a long time now. And yet, can you think of anything that has hit harder than the Marvel Cinematic Universe? I mean,
the Star Wars universe.
And Star Wars is a good example of this too. Star Wars, is that a complex story, really?
No, it's lame. You just put knights in space.
You just offended so many people.
and if we want
literally a princess and swords.
And people make
magic
arguments for Kurosawa, right? As well, the Seven Samurai and all that stuff. People do a lot of work on this stuff. But at the end of the day, it's a story about good versus evil.
Yeah.
It's simple. And that is what people are craving today for the most part, is simplicity. I'm not saying that we don't enjoy a good complex, complexly woven narrative.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is we've been sort of trained a little bit to be tired of the complexity of postmodern narratives that say only, well, it's just your perspective. We can't agree on anything.
Is that why people didn't like The Matrix 2 and 3?
That's a really good question. I'd have to think about that one a little bit. I will tell you that I didn't love them. Yeah. I liked the first one. I thought was good. It was very good at the time. I've learned to appreciate it even more. But I did not like 2 and 3 really that much. I didn't. Yeah. Am I looking forward to the new one? Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with the new one. But I mean, the easy example is, why is DC... DC has their superhero films, and you've got great superheroes, Superman, Batman, right? Real solid figures. Why is it that they have failed so hard? Because they're trying to tell a postmodern story. They're making Superman, who is known affectionately as the Boy Scout, right? And the Boy Scout because he's simple. I believe in good. I believe in humanity.
Yeah.
But what did they do with Man of Steel in 2013? They mucked it up. And all of a sudden, he's this complex, brooding figure. And people were like, oh, come on. Yeah. Meanwhile, Marvel, you've got Iron Man and Captain America. Yeah. And Iron Man seems like he's a complex character, but he's not. He's really not. And you don't get any simpler than Captain America. And people ate it up because they delivered a simple story. That's why we loved it. A simple story.
Yeah, but now Captain America's a black dude.
Oh, I haven't caught up. Is it literally? Literally?
The Falcon became, spoiler alert, the Falcon became Captain Falcon America, essentially.
Oh, the black Captain America.
It's interesting to see.
Oh, no, that's what it was. He goes, hey, you're the black Falcon. And he goes, no, just the Falcon.
Well, I'll be interested, to be honest with you, to see how people react to that on a larger scale. For the most part, it's been quite positive. But will people react well to change? I mean, as a species, we tend to not react well to change, especially when you're dealing with things that we've created as kind of sacred space, which is the third trait that I see in neo-modernism, that we're creating personal sacred spaces. And we're defending them.
Do you mean the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a sacred space, or do you mean something else?
It actually can be. believe it or
Okay.
not, right? Because have you ever had a discussion with someone about something like a book or a movie or whatever, and if they love it, they'll defend it and they'll get really upset if you're like, I don't really like it. They'll be like, why? It's because it feels like you're attacking something that they deem to be a source of sacredness to them. And I don't mean like on a religious level necessarily. When I say sacred space, I simply mean a place that you can go that you've deemed should be outside of mockery for you. But that's very different.
Yeah. So like when I talk shit about the Seinfeld TV show, there are people that will get butthurt.
If that's their sacred space, they're going to be like, look, don't talk about my Seinfeld, right? Don't do that. Yeah, it could be. That's a tough one because that's a very postmodern show, right? They don't want a dominant narrative in that show. They actually want chaos and kind of disturbance.
Did you watch the Mandalorian series?
Yes.
Is that a similar, simple, good guy story in the cowboy theme?
You tell me. What do you think?
I thought it was just you take a bunch of cowboy stories and put a whatever you call it, the Boba Fett guy in there.
Yeah. They went completely neo-modern, and they're being rewarded for it. They're not trying to make complex narratives that you have to try to think through what's the good guy, what's the bad guy. They simply said, look, we're going to make this easy for you. Yeah. He's good. Anyone who tries to go against him is bad. Enjoy the ride.
Yeah, it was fun to watch. Yeah.
It's fantastic. Yeah. Absolutely. And that's what people are craving. What I'm nervous about is so again, just to like connect that even with the MCU, people started saying toward the end of the movies, there's a Marvel formula and it's a little bit too formulaic. It's like this guy's good and then this one's evil, right? Yeah. But the problem is this. They should hold their ground and continue the formula anyway. Yeah. Because if they try to go too complex and they get nervous, I do not believe their fortune will continue. I really don't.
So evil characters do not need justifiable motivation, right? Can characters just be evil because they're evil? Or is that not correct?
Yeah, but think that's a good think about Thanos for a second too, right? If you recall the last two movies in the phases. So for example, Infinity War, Thanos is actually somewhat of a complex character in the sense that not that you agree with him, but he has a certain logic behind his concern, which is what all benevolent, at least they believe they're being benevolent, dictators try to sell to people is, I'm doing this out of a sense of love. Yeah. And so in Thanos's mind, he's saying, because I love you, I'm going to kill off half the population. Yes. And that's how dictators and rise in power, is selling their tyranny as benevolence. Okay, now that's interesting. Yeah. But it's not as if you're confused about, is that the wrong thing? It's wrong. Right. Then though, what do they do in the final movie of phase 3? That gets taken out completely, that complexity. And it's just pure, like he literally says at one point, I thought I could do this and be kind to you. Now I'm just going to wipe you all out. And that's that kind of, let's end this on a simplistic note. He's just pure evil. Therefore, anything we do to him is perfectly justifiable. You don't have to worry about it.
Also, he tortured his daughters so that we know he's a bad guy.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. He threw his daughter down a pit. Yeah, that's pretty terrible. Yeah.
Okay.
So fantastic. So I don't know if you answered this through all that, but
we might have detoured a bit.
So postmodernism with the skepticism, and then you're speaking about like kind of we're looking for a simple answer in neo-modernism. Does the postmodernism kind of with that skepticism we're looking for an answer? Is that what neo-modernism, is that your perspective of it?
Yeah, the easy way to put it is is the idea of we grew tired of the skepticism in every aspect of our lives that we were seeing. And I'll give you a very clear example that I've used in class, and it's a tough one, but I'm going to use it anyway.
COVID vaccines.
No, this is about Family Guy, actually.
Oh, okay.
But if if you're familiar with the show Family Guy, then you know that there's a character called Herbert, and Herbert has a name attached to him, Herbert the Pervert. And it's a well-known fact that he's actually a pedophile, well known by the characters.
Oh, the old guy.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, there's a scene in one of the episodes where he's kind of watching the two children, Meg and Chris, specifically, not so much Stewie, but Meg and Chris. And he's tucking in Chris. And it is the most cringe scene. Because why? The tension keeps building because we as the audience know this guy's a pedophile.
Yeah.
And he's telling this story of Peter and the Wolf, and he's whistling. And then at the very end of the scene, Chris lets the tension out by simply blurting out, "Are you a pedophile?" And everyone laughs. Now, when I show this in class, students laugh as well, because that's the nature of comedy when done well, is that you raise the level of tension and then you create a mechanism to release that tension through laughter.
Yeah.
But here's the problem. If you take, and this is not to make people feel guilty, I always have to say that, because I like Family Guy, I laugh at Family Guy too. If you take the context of comedy out of the situation a little bit, what are we really laughing at there?
Yeah.
I mean, what did, I guess a better way to ask the question is this: what did Seth MacFarlane and Family Guy get us to laugh at?
I think we're laughing that we know what the character is supposed to be, and then one of the other characters calls him out with the question.
But think about the context of this scene. Come on, you got to get right down to it. You got to be honest here. Seth MacFarlane got us to laugh at pedophilia. There's no way around that. And I say that for a reason, not to make people feel guilty, but instead to try to make the point that this is the power of historical movements and cultures that work inside them. In no other historical movement than postmodernism, which destabilizes our belief in anything, no other movement would get us to laugh at pedophilia. And yet it was so strong, it had destabilized us so much, we actually did laugh at it. And the only point I'm making there is we should take note of that. Yeah.
So is nothing off limits in our modern age and today?
They are today, though, right? I mean, people talk about cancel culture a lot. People talk about all these things now. This was not as big of a phenomena in postmodernism when everything was individual perspective and everything was, destabilize any dominant narratives. Today in neo-modernism, it does matter to us. It does. Yeah. And that's something also to take note of. I pass no judgment necessarily on the individual things. I'm just simply here to say, look, as a species, we have to note this.
But isn't Family Guy a separate space in that it is a totally fictional cartoon world where the whole goal is to fire out as many jokes as possible and to step over every possible line you can find? Don't we know that going in, that this show is not polite or courteous? This show is not trying to offend, but trying to break every boundary and cross every line.
Oh, no, you could say it's trying to offend. It is. Yeah. And that's part of its nature, right? Because you know what else emerges in postmodernism? Stand-up comedy. Stand-up comedy really comes out of postmodernism. And why? Because a stand-up comic's job is to say, when you enter my space, my theater, you leave your sacred cows or whatever you have, whatever sacred space you've created, out that door. Because my job is to destabilize all of you and build tension and then release that tension through laughter. And so that's another indication where you have a postmodern art, which it is. Postmodern art that is moving into neo-modernism as well. And they have their own struggle today between themselves of trying to figure out how far can we take comedy. That is a neo-modern problem. You do not have that discussion problem in postmodernism where people are saying, you know, maybe I won't say this joke because it might offend someone. Nope. You don't have that in postmodernism. And so that's what I mean again by it's the value in this is for us as human beings to take note of the pull that historical movements have on shaping how we interact with each other. I mean, any of those comedy podcasts you listen to with the comedians on them, they have these conversations. Are they funny? That's a good, not always, honestly, not always, but they have these kind of meta conversations, right? Like what's too far? Someone I listened to recently, Bob Saget, he always talks about this. He's always saying, oh, but I don't make that joke anymore. That was a different time. Yeah, it was a different time, but guess what, Bob? You're not.
He actually, he likes being offensive.
He does, and he's good at it. He's good at it, and he is clearly struggling in neo-modernism to try to figure out, I think his real problem is that he got famous for that TV show that was such a goody two shoes. Full House.
Full House, and then wasn't he on America's
Funniest
Home Videos? Yeah.
So everybody knows him as a nice guy, and the moment you spent years of your life looking at this dude on TV, and then if you're a big enough fan, you go to a show, and then he's this offensive, cussing, nasty motherfucker on stage, and you're trips
what is
people
that?
Out, right?
What is he doing there?
He's not in character. That he's a different guy on stage, but people don't know that when they buy the ticket.
Yeah, so, but does he know? Do you think that he knows that people are going to be like he knows his material going on stage? Do you think he knew that people were going to be like, "Whoa, what is Bob Saget talking about here?" Yeah, because at the time he was okay in postmodernism, thinking to himself, I'm going to destabilize the heck out of everyone right now. I'm going to throw out the nastiest, dirtiest stuff and make people look at me like I'm confused. You've got Danny Tanner, father from Full House, and then I've got Bob Saget, the stand-up comic. And in some ways, that was a little bit of his entertainment angle as well, which was, this is me really as a stand-up comic. I'm going to destabilize everything that you think of me as the actor or the host of America's Funniest Home Videos.
It's funny, as I used to manage comedians, and the way I see that is Bob's already got enough money from his TV shows that if he gets on stage, it's for him. He doesn't need the money. He doesn't need the fame. It doesn't actually contribute to anything in that sense. So really, he's up there for his own amusement. And I think being that they call it blue, being that blue comic, is for himself, really, to say I'm not just a square, and to amuse himself. Like he kind of doesn't care if the crowd leaves there kind of pissed off or confused. They already bought the ticket, so it's a funny asshole kind of thing to do. Yeah, I don't mean funny comedy. I mean it's weird. It's weird to be that much of an asshole. Why not just give the people what they want if you're selling tickets? Is what I don't understand.
Yeah, and it's you're right. I mean, obviously, you've got a certain set of comedians who already have made their name, have made their money, and so they can go up. Someone like Dave Chappelle does not need to go up and do Netflix specials, really. He doesn't.
Yeah, right.
And that gives him a freedom to actually hold firm to the postmodern art of stand-up comedy. Look, if you watch a Netflix special with Dave Chappelle, and you're upset, look, that's on you. Yeah. It really is, because you have to know the art, and you have to know that his whole purpose is to destabilize things that we tend to agree upon, right? Why do comics talk about things like marriage and relationships and all this stuff? Because we tend to develop narratives around those that we hold dear to. And so when the comic goes up there and talks about the marriage problems and this and that, they're destabilizing that and making it uncomfortable for us, almost daring us to think of our lives and our narratives in a different way. And there is a lot of usefulness in that.
Yeah, because there's a lot of societal norms and societal pressures on things like marriage and the way you're supposed to behave.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how stand-up comedy, because I already have seen shifts in I don't know about you, I've seen big shifts in stand-up comedy in the past like 5 to 8, 9 years, where I'm starting to see a lot more people just kind of tell stories, and they're always these kind of happy ending kind of things and positivity. And to me, that's the effect of their nervousness of neo-modernism and not truly being able to reconcile what is a postmodern art with a neo-modern age. And then you've got the Bill Burrs, Chappelle's, the older ones who come out still with their postmodern destabilization. And in some ways, I think that's going to be really important moving forward, that stays true to that art form and carries us through neo-modernism.
Oh, it's fascinating that you see everything in that perspective and from that light, because that's not the way most of us typically are walking around thinking about stuff. So for example, if you think Marvel cinematic movies are pretty straightforward, good guys, bad guys, I would see that more as like, hey, when people watch a movie, they just want to have fun. They don't want to think too hard, because really this is entertainment, and they just want to relax and have a good time and enjoy the show. If you make them think too hard, then most people don't want to sit there and think too hard for a couple hours. So that's the way I would have viewed it prior to this conversation. So it's so cool to see that you have a different angle on these sorts of trends and things in American entertainment.
Yeah, and I would just add that element of, again, Captain America. People were crying in the movie theaters at 2 scenes involving Captain America. One, when he's wielding Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why people are crying at that scene is because, remember, Thor's hammer they had set up as being a judge of who is worthy. Yeah. And we, as the audience, already knew that, Steve Rogers is worthy. If anyone is worthy, please, it's got to be at least Steve Rogers, right? Because if he's not worthy, none of us are, right? Because we're much worse in this fictional world. So when he wields Mjolnir, people genuinely feel like, oh, thank God, something that makes sense in the world. Yeah. That what we knew is already true and being shown to be truthful here on a cosmological level. Steve Rogers' goodness makes him truly worthy to be someone to idolize and enjoy and follow as a leader. And then the last thing that people cried for is what? A simple dance. Just a beautiful dance with a woman he loved. Is there any more saccharine, sweet, simple scene than just a dance? There's nothing complex about it. And people cried. They
wasn't even a good song.
Oh, it's just such a beautiful scene. And Marvel, to their credit, right through those first 3 phases, they read the room perfectly. They said, forget the complex stuff. Yeah. Let's give the people something that they can sit down and make them believe in right and wrong, good and evil, even though those concepts have never really been simple. Never. Yeah. But we do love the belief that they're simple. Yeah. We love that. And Marvel gave us that, and they were rewarded handsomely.
Wait, so isn't Thor not worthy then, since he was born into it and he didn't earn it?
He wasn't. If you recall, in the first film, or was it the second film, he loses Thor's hammer. He loses it because he's not worthy. And even then, again, I have my own issues. I wasn't a big fan of where they went with Thor's character. I was not a big fan of it. I loved the first movie, which was done by Kenneth Branagh, I think, directing it. And it was wonderfully grand. And then they kind of made him a bad comedian to me. And
you didn't like Fat Lebowski Thor?
I hated it. I hated Fat Thor. And I hated it because there was a wonderful story that you could have really had given people. That, let me set this up for the two of you. Yeah. So here you are, you're Thor, right? Okay. You have your axe. You're about to save the world. And what do? Because of your stupid ego, you don't go for the head. and you drop your axe down on the shoulder of Thanos so that you can tell him to his face, I told you I was going to kill you. Pure ego.
Yeah.
And what does Thanos do? Snap. And you've just lost half the population. You tell me how you would deal with that as a human being, knowing it's your fault that half the population is gone.
Yeah.
You tell me you wouldn't go into a supreme level of depression. And the way they sort of made that depression a joke, I just thought, wow, you really could have had a powerful story here for people who feel like I've done bad things.
No, they didn't want to make him too complex. They didn't want you to go into his real depression.
But is that the complex story? Or is the complex story actually that he's just like a gamer who's going to, get fat and that's it? I think the simple story would have actually been he's just supremely depressed somewhere in some universe where he wants nothing to do with humanity, because that's how we actually are as humans, right? Depression, the cruelest part of depression is how it convinces you that you should be alone and you deserve to be alone.
Oh.
That's what depression, that's the cruelest thing it does to you. It takes you away from people. And instead, what Marvel did there to get the joke is they made him with other people having fun. You tell me what depression that sounds like.
Yeah. Liem, have you ever been depressed?
Oh yeah.
Is that when you're not talking to me?
But they wouldn't make a Marvel movie into it. It's a bit more complex.
Yes.
Wait, do online multiplayer games combat depression then? Because you're always with somebody if you're battling 100 people?
I think it depends on the person.
Okay.
Some people cope with it in different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. Yeah.
For neo-modernism and postmodernism, give kind of like a 1 or 2 sentence description, and then also give the biggest pros and cons. As in, I'm thinking neo-modernism from what you guys have been talking about. I imagine in your mind you probably see there's some the bad things definitely, and then what are some of the good things? So pros and cons.
Yeah, so I'll jump into the pros of, maybe I'll start with postmodernism because I want people to stop hating it. So the immediate pro.
Skepticism.
Well,
also
that's a
short
tough one.
Short description too.
The short description. So postmodernism really can be broken down to just being about skepticism, right? Like you just said, Emmett.
Well, I got that from you.
Yeah, sure.
Credit where credit's due.
Well, I guess
can be. Go ahead.
When I hear skepticism as are you saying this? How would I word it? Like a description in the sense of why did the skepticism arise exactly?
Because they're feeding us this story and it might not be true.
Yeah. No, I can do that. I see what you're saying now. So that goes back to the rubber band issue, right? So modernism, the end of modernism, we're trying to do those two things. We're trying to reconfigure and refigure out what it means to be a human being at this point in the wake of World War I and great atrocities, even in America, the end of the Civil War. I think America jumps into modernism sooner than Europe for the first time in a major historical movement. So here's what happens. We get to the end of modernism and we realize we've come out the other end here and we don't have an answer. We don't know actually how to redefine what it means to be human in the wake of this new ability to destroy human beings in such a large scale with so little intimacy as well between them. And so what
it's
emerges,
like a snap of the fingers.
Well, yeah. I mean, you get to that part in Thanos, it's even easier. Yeah. But so what happens is, because we couldn't figure out that the answer to that question, we get into skepticism about knowing anything as truth.
Okay.
So people will often talk about what are called the French like post-structuralists, people like Jacques Derrida and Francois Lyotard, all these names. Okay. What they're talking about, they mostly deal a lot with language to a degree, especially Derrida. And that's usually the one that people find the most difficulty and annoyance with. Because Derrida is skeptical of meaning on a language level. And so, for example, they would say something like, take a story like the Old Man and the Sea, which is in the title itself. It's about the old man, Santiago. Okay. It's technically his story, but a postmodern reading would look at that and say, okay, let's destabilize it. And let's see what happens when we move Santiago to the side and look at maybe the other characters and make them the central figure. What happens when we look at the story that way? Do we get a different meaning out of the story by raising something else to the level of hero, let's say, to it? So we destabilize, and we look even outside language, because language is how we construct meaning to a degree. And when you're skeptical of language and you're trying to write things like governance and infrastructure, you infuse skepticism in that. And so one of the greatest, I would say the greatest pro that comes out of postmodernism is the civil rights movement of the 60s in America. Because what did that actually do? It said, we see a dominant narrative here, but you know what? Let's move that to the side and look at these people who can't fully participate in governance, in civilization. And so you can absolutely, and you should, make the argument that postmodernism and destabilization is what allows the civil rights movement to be as powerful as it is in the 60s and 70s. Additionally, you have people like Lucille Ball with I Love Lucy, a woman with her own show that's anti the established, dominant narrative.
And you have married a Cuban dude.
I mean, that story alone, if you ever look into that story of what they went through, it's fantastic. They ended up starting their own studio, Desilu Productions, because what's his name? What's wrong? I can't remember his name. Ricky, right, Ricky Ricardo, because he refused in some ways to kowtow to the dominant narrative of the production companies. He didn't want to move. He thought this was a problem. You're going to make me move and spend all this money and bankrupt us and not even allow us to have any sort of sense that this is going to work for you. So instead, we're going to start our own production company and do it this way. But that's not the case. It's just a very interesting story. Anyway, you have Nat King Cole as well, who's the first African-American to have his own show in the 50s. That's narrative destabilization. That's postmodernism. And the last thing I'll say about it is
also Jesus is not white.
Yes, that is destabilizing in an odd way, because in history, if you look at the historical paintings, they weren't painting him that way all the time anyway. So which was odd. So it was almost like that changed at a certain point where they just kept kind of, upping the whiteness of it until you got to the point where it was like Kurt Cobain. You're like, what? No, he didn't look like Kurt Cobain. What are you talking about?
Like us.
I mean, it really is quite odd how that worked. But I mean, you can see how there is a benefit to taking postmodern philosophy or thinking and every so often applying it to an important infrastructure, because it'll force you to say, what happens if we just move it temporarily to the side and just see what else is going on here? That's a very valuable tool to have moving forward for us as a civilization. Now, the bad, we sort of hit upon tangentially even. The bad is you destabilize something so much that you make language meaningless. And you create isolated incidences where you believe in one thing, you believe in another, I believe in this, and we find really difficult ways to connect on a meaningful level. And that's sort of that, and also the mockery of everything, that nothing is sacred at the end of postmodernism. Nothing. Again, we're laughing at this stuff.
Are you saying you shouldn't force me to make new pronouns?
What I'm saying is now that is a neo-modern issue as well. Yeah. Because what these people who are struggling with this, what they're actually struggling with is trying to write to find that narrative reassurance in their own narrative. They're saying, I have a story that I want to tell, and I want to tell it my way.
Yeah.
And I don't want you to mock it. That's a neo-modern issue.
Yeah.
They want you to take it seriously. And that's why I say those three core principles of neo-modernism, right? Narrative reassurance, transcending the body, and creating sacred space. We're dealing with all of these things at the same time, and yet we're still not fully aware of the fact that we're dealing with a historical movement problem.
Well, it's not historical. We're in the middle of it. It's not
I don't
history
know.
yet.
I have no idea if we're in, I mean, I don't know where we are in the movement, to be honest with you. I mean, movements can last a long time.
How far has the rubber band currently stretched?
I would say that it's again, it begins maybe in the early 2000s, but that's not the same thing as when we become consciously aware of it.
Yeah.
I think we're just now in the past 5 to 7 years starting to become consciously aware of it. And we still haven't figured out what to do with it, though.
Yeah.
And so to answer your question, too, about neo-modernism, right? So you've got those core principles. The positives of that are, once again, we can start to believe in things and have stability in things like right, wrong, good and evil. And that what that provides us is focus and a way to move forward in life. It helps to clarify a little bit what kind of person we want to be, even, right, to a degree. Because if I were to ask you if you were a good person, you would have to have first done the work to establish what a good person is.
Yeah.
And then put yourself up against that. That is not something you do in postmodernism. That means you have to create a stable narrative of what a good person entails and then put yourself up against it. That's a neo-modern narrative reassurance issue. So there's a lot of good in that. The bad, though, you're seeing in terms of the arguments that we're having, because everyone is very nervous about defending their narratives, their sacred spaces, and it's why we're trying to find reasons to transcend this world, the body that we live in, because we need time to not be so defensive, not be so worried about defending ourselves, right? Meditation takes that away for a lot of people.
What if I'm very sure, me personally, what if I'm very sure what good and bad is, good and evil is, and I don't feel like I have any sacred spaces? I kind of don't care about transcending myself. Does that mean I'm kind of like a caveman living in a past time?
No. It just means that, look, like everyone else in the world, you've got to deal with the same problems the rest of us do. The same exact things, because you have to still interact with others and interact with culture in a meaningful way. So you can pretend like I don't have any part in this. I don't care. You can mean it, right? 100%. I don't care. Right. But guess what? That person who's arguing with you, who won't leave you alone, who's telling you, listen to me. I want you to speak to me in this way, because I believe that that's respectful, and I believe this. Guess what? You have to deal with that neo-modern problem too, just like the rest of us.
No, so I want to eat my hamburger helper, and I want to watch the new Shang-Chi movie.
Yeah, and I mean, you can't hide either from these from the historical movements as well. You just can't.
Yeah, I'm aware of these changes happening around me. It looks like. I'm not tweeting. I'm not on the Twitters.
Nope, neither am I. Nothing to do with it. Yep.
I'm just thinking off the cuff. I think there's a question in here, but do you think the postmodernism, neo-modernism, the psychology of people is just, the labeling of that is really just the psychology of masses of people dealing with the evolution of society and culture? Meaning the label itself is almost more trying to define the type of people at that time, but then if we look at the psychology, we could almost...
Yeah, we're very different than people were in the 60s or in the 1600s, right? Mentally, we occupy a different space.
Yeah,
so is the problem more psychological in this case? Or I don't know if it'd be easier for me just to ask, what do you think is good way to fix the problems in neo-modernism? I don't know if that's an easier
Drugs. Oh, no.
Psychedelics. There you go. Right. No, but the, you know what? People are going to hate me for saying this.
We can edit it out.
I don't think you can.
Oh, we can't fix it.
Yeah, I don't. And I'm not even sure that we're necessarily supposed to. And that's what's so maddening about trying to look at this from a historical movement's perspective, is that, look, the right way, if I need to say it, the right way would be to look at the good in these movements that has helped us continually evolve and grow as a species in good, positive ways, and to get rid of the stuff that's negative, right? Like that would be the ideal.
Yeah.
But is that going to happen? I don't know. I have no power over how the rest of the movement's going to go. And even what I'm trying to do now, by giving the movement itself that we're still in this much clarity, I mean, I have no idea how this is going to end. I have thoughts about what's going to come next.
Oh, give us your most entertaining.
You want my Nostradamus?
No, only the most entertaining projections.
Well, I'll tell you this, and I haven't said this really, I don't think anywhere else.
Cryptocurrency. Sorry.
That's okay. What I'm starting to see, I'm starting to think about us pulling back this rubber band of neo-modernism and where it's going to go. I think that postmodernism was a kind of precipice for us. And I think we're coming our way back down. So neo-modernism is a new kind of modernism, which came before postmodernism. It is. We're still kind of shrinking the individual story, right? Everyone has individual stories. That's a shrinking. At the same time, you can hear people trying to rethink what it means to be human. That's a modernist view. Okay. It's neo though, because we have a lot of other things too that we're trying to deal with. What I see potentially happening then is that we keep going and we go into a neo-romanticism.
Oh.
And what that means is this. It means we're going to have a new kind of conceptualization. We're going to burn out from our rationalization of everything, of trying to figure out what the human being is, what we are individually. And we're going to go into a space where we try to just feel some kind of genuine connection to something. So I think you're going to move from meditation and meditation and psychedelics
and Burning Man.
I'm trying to think where that you probably would get. I mean, you got that already. That's been pretty big for a while, right? Yeah. Burning Man. I actually think you're going to get a rise in religion.
What?
I do. I think people are going to say, I want some kind of, I'll say it as a clarified connection. Because if you read the research on psychedelics, actually, what the best thing that they're doing so far is even atheistic accounts. The way they're describing what happens to them is through religious language. Because that's the best language that they have to use. They'll say things like, it's like experiencing God's love, which I think comes out of, I forgot the gentleman's book now talking about this, but it's like
Sam Harris.
Oh no, we can talk about Sam Harris though as well. I can talk about.
Are you anti-Sam?
No, I'm not anti-Sam.
Damn.
But he has his own problems here that I think is a little bit like. I'll say I'm in the middle on Sam Harris. I really am. We can talk about that in a second.
Okay, we'll come back to Sam.
Yeah, we'll come back to Harris in a second. But I do think that people are going to find that they need what they're going to see as a more concrete connection to something spiritual. And that usually means a god in some way or gods.
So now is the perfect time for us to start a religion and give everybody LSD, right? Yeah.
You know what? I'm not going to answer that because it's true.
Yeah.
I do believe you're going to see a rise in probably cults.
As long as I get to bang virgins, I'm in.
Oh, you're gonna. I mean, you can mark my word. Hopefully, I'll be dead. I'll go ahead and I'll just say, hopefully, I'm dead by then.
No, join us. We need you.
No, I'm not joining. No.
We need the book part. There has to be a holy book. We need a good book.
Somewhere, someone might dig this up at a certain point, and I do think rising cults and a rise in organized religion. I think that's what we're going to see in neo-romanticism.
Better not be yoga. Better not be based on yoga.
Okay.
It's just stretching.
So wait, are you anti Sam Harris?
No, I find him to be the most intelligent and rational person putting stuff onto the internet.
He's very rational. He is.
Yeah,
He is very rational.
I generally agree with almost everything he says, and I find him to be the most intelligent speaker on a lot of topics. I kind of don't give a shit about meditation much, or or when he talks about psychedelics, I kind of don't care because I'm not interested in those things personally. I don't hate him. I don't know. I like who I am, and I wake up pretty happy, so I don't have any need to calm down or go on a trip or find God. So it's weird that he does spend a lot of time questioning consciousness, and I go, well, we kind of don't know what consciousness is. All right, cool. Let's move on. I wish he could just be in power and focus on problems and and solve the problems of the world.
He is incredibly intelligent and incredibly rational, and I do think that he is in one area where I think he's not quite aware of himself enough is in that element of him pushing meditation and psychedelics to a degree. And here's why. I think he is fooling himself or lying to himself that he doesn't think, because he's an ardent atheist. Like, he's absolutely like, forget, I don't want theocracies. I don't want any, none of that stuff.
Yeah.
But the problem that he's always dealt with is that issue that psychedelics, like I just said, tend to be spoken of through religious language. And he won't give people that element. And I think that's a problem, because when you try to use secular language to describe it, Sam often finds himself with very little to say. And I do think that that's a problem. And I would say the last thing is no free will thing.
Yeah.
I find his argument to be incredibly solid. I mean, really, if you break down his rationale, it's incredibly solid. Right. But my question to him would always be, what use is it if by giving that to everyone in the world, all you do is break humanity? What's the point? Because there needs to be a discussion of utility, whether or not he wants to have it. If you immediately, well, I'll ask both of you this question.
Yeah.
Let's say you could snap your fingers like Thanos, and everyone would automatically, there you go, nicely done. And everyone would automatically become pure determinists. No free will. Okay. What happens? How does the world look?
I don't know. People don't bother doing anything, right? Why get out of bed if you have no choices?
I would say depends on, because it's people still in the play. The psychology, I think the psychology of people typically...
no, but if everybody wakes up and believes they don't have any choices, that everything just happens the way it happens.
I still think human nature has some type of drive. I don't know the answer to that. There's something, it might be just evolutionary from why does an ant go and grab food and bring it back? I know that's for the better of its colony, but
he's not thinking about that. He's just programmed to do it.
I think humans have a certain factor of that.
Yeah, a biological imperative to survive.
We have the curse of consciousness, though, that if I want some hamburger helper, I got to go, oh, no, I got to go over to the stove and make sure I got the turkey and cook it up, and then I got to clean the pots afterwards. I'm thinking about all this. So it becomes a choice of like, do I really want a hamburger helper, or am I too lazy? Am I just going to microwave this cheese on a piece of bread?
I would argue that that biological driver for action would still be there, even though I guess in this conversation. So the root of the question was, if every human had the notion that there is no free will, but there's still the biological thing. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and I'll even help you here a little bit, because the I think what Sam would go to is kind of Nietzsche's idea of replacing these thoughts with like a value-based system to a degree, where human beings can still have values, right? Like he, in his own podcast, he has a segment where he talks about struggling with determinism because of his connection with his daughter, I think. Yeah. And this idea of, is there a philosophical problem with coming to terms with maybe not choosing to love his daughter? And don't quote me on this, but I'm trying to get the right sentiment out. It was an issue of looking at the very unromantic notion that I didn't choose to love my wife, and I'm not choosing to love my daughter. There's a programmed element in our brains biologically that is predisposing us to move toward those.
Yeah.
My question to you both had to do with, okay, so let's snap our fingers and all of a sudden everyone agrees with Sam Harris. Here you go.
Yeah.
Everyone agrees there is no free will. Everything is predetermined. What does civilization look like at that point?
Well, I think we're already there. I think because, I made myself go to the gym earlier today, but I didn't choose my brain or my life prior to that moment. I didn't choose all of the things that led up to me wanting to be healthier. I didn't choose where I was born or who my parents were. I didn't choose so many factors that allowed me to go to the gym earlier. But at that moment, I chose to go to the gym. I could have gone to Arby's and had a
now.
Giant.
Why do you choose? Play on words here. Why do you're choosing to use the word "I chose to go to the gym"? Why? Why would you say it that way and not?
Because I agree that if you keep rewinding backwards, that there isn't really free will, is that everything is a stack of events and physical, placements of molecules that led up to this moment. But like you said, there's no utility in that. I still have to live my life as if I have choices. Otherwise, what am I going to do all day? Like, why am I here talking to you? I could be jerking off right now. What does it matter? What does anything matter?
If you're so predetermined, I suppose.
Yeah. We in America in this day and age, we are so lucky to have so much compared to everybody in human history. That why wouldn't I walk around enjoying all of these options? I can't even fathom depression. We have the freedom to like walk out the door and go be anybody you want and get a job or do whatever. You have so much freedom and so much choice and so many wonders and amusements available that kings of old would have marveled at. I probably eat better than most kings ever ate. And it's a weird thing to think, well, I don't have any choices. I'm just doing this. That may be factually true that I did not construct any of this and that I'm here in this moment through devices entirely not of my own. But now that I'm here, I can do whatever I want. I could walk out on this podcast, or I could come up with something brilliant that becomes the next viral thing on the internet, or I could just compliment Joe and say, hey, you know what? I appreciate talking to you, man. You're a good dude. You got some great thoughts and an incredible backdrop. You have fantastic choices in microphone equipment.
Yes.
I mean, is this your
real?
Yeah. Is this your real house, or is this a blue screen thing?
No, that's the house. Yeah.
Yeah. Look at you. You're living a great life. I'm happy to see this window into your life, so I can appreciate that. But I don't know. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
You are.
Yeah.
I think you are. And I guess what I would say to Sam, if I even sat down with him, is I would say, Sam, follow through with your thought process here, right? Because the two big things that he brings up that are rock solid are things like you weren't, like you just said, even you weren't born making your decision to have your parents, or where you're born, or country, all those things. Absolutely. You also can think of if you're a predeterminist, it changes the way that you look at negative things that people do, right? So the person who is in prison, which he brings up a lot, you would look at that situation differently, and you would say there were predetermined factors that led to this person's situation that brought them to prison. Those are two incredibly tough human problems to deal with.
Yeah, but I didn't choose not to be a murderous psychopath.
Exactly. And he brings up the case of the gentleman in Texas who shot people and left a note saying, please look at my brain.
Yeah.
When you kill me, look at my brain. And sure enough, they found, I think it was like a tumor.
Yeah.
They found something pressing on it. And that's Sam's big kind of gotcha moment.
Yeah.
And I give him all of that.
Yeah.
And my question to him, though, would be so simple. If you snapped your fingers and everyone believed what you believe,
yeah,
you know what you take away, though?
What's that?
All narrativization. All the things that we built our civilization on, even the way you just spoke about your day.
Yeah.
How important was it for you to say, even before we started recording, that we chose to go to the gym, chose to work out?
Yeah.
That is not simply a logical problem. That is a way that we have organized our existence and created heroic narratives for ourselves, not because we want to make ourselves into some grand hero. No, it's a way to say, I want to take note of the positivity that I chose to go to the gym and work out.
I mean, if grand hero is possible, I'll take it.
It's sure, take it, right? I mean, in all reality, though, right? When people talk about getting off of drugs and alcohol, a major part of that is being able to narrate the choice that they did it.
Yeah.
And the choice every day to not do it. And my problem with this is if it ever did catch on, I think on a grand scale, I do believe you would, in the long run, do more harm than good. Whether it's true or not, I think that would be a very big problem on a human scale.
So if people weren't able to be proud of their successes, then we just wouldn't care about stuff? Is that what you mean?
Take away the human being's ability to narrate, right? Right now we have veterans who have been coming home from the Iraq-Afghanistan conflicts, right?
Yeah.
And what a lot of therapists and psychologists are doing with them is they're utilizing something called narrative therapy. And what that is because, it's been proven time and time again that our memories are not that great, actually.
Yeah.
They're not that accurate. And so for a veteran who's dealt with some kind of traumatic event, what narrative therapy does is it says, okay, let's admit that what we're going to say here is probably not 100% accurate. But let's give it a story. Let's give it a narrative direction so that we can interact with the story of what's happening. And because, as I tell my students, when you write and you narrate, you're imposing order on chaos. And that is so important to us as a species, to be able to impose order on the chaos of our minds, our thoughts, of the daily things that swirl around us that happen. If you lose that I in yourself, in your narrative, and not only just you, by the way, because in our picture, we took it away from everyone. I have no idea how we interact with each other in a meaningful way anymore in that world. I really don't. Because then it takes away me asking you, Emmett, about your story today. How'd you do today? How was your day?
Oh, you're tricking me. You're just trying to get a story out of me, you son of a bitch.
Well, yeah, I'm asking you for a narrative. I want to know how.
If I'd known, I would have come up with something better than I just went to the gym.
And yet even your choice, right? Your choice to say that one thing is why. Because in some ways you were proud of it, weren't you?
Yeah.
I got up, I worked out. You were proud of that event, and you chose to narrate that event for me.
Yes. I also saved a child that was falling down a staircase one time.
Well, that's beside the point.
Oh,
The point is you went and you worked it out.
No, cousin Tommy owes me. What do you think, Lem? You've been judgingly quiet over here.
No, my next question was going to be, what do you think when you say maybe the next era or label will be modernism?
Neo-romanticism. Romanticism. Yep.
What key indicators do you think in writing literature, comedy, movies would come out of that, if you had to guess?
Okay, so neo-modern literature, even in movies, I always forget to look up the title of this movie. There's a movie that came out on Netflix recently with the actress Anna Kendrick, and it's about three astronauts who go into space, and they're on a mission, and they're trying to do like good with plants and start a colony, and they find a gentleman who's on board who like apparently was like knocked out by accident. And so now you're dealing with this whole math problem of they only have enough life support for 3 people, and now they have 4. What makes that neo-modern is they're shrinking down the problem to just those 3. This is not a huge major. The human species is going to be fine.
Stowaway.
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
It's a good movie, actually.
Right.
And what makes it also neo-modern is it shrinks it even further. I don't want to give it away because it's still a fairly new movie. I'll just say
this won't be out for another 3 weeks.
We'll just say disclaimer. Anybody watching this, if you haven't watched Stowaway,
spoiler alert, right?
Pause it for a few minutes.
There's an Asian on the ship.
They shrink it even more, and they make it just about the Anna Kendrick character's choice to say, can I live, in other words, my narrative, can I live with knowing that I'm going to choose one of these other 3 people to die and not myself? And that's a neo-modern problem in trying to narrate your own story, why that's so important. And ultimately she chooses, I can't live with the knowledge that somebody else died because of me. And even though it's not her fault.
Oh,
and
wait, shouldn't they kill the stowaway because they didn't have a ticket?
They talk about it.
Yeah.
But they decide that that's not fair, essentially, right? Like they value everyone equally as a human being, which is fascinating, right? Which is good. I think we would like to think that we would all do that.
Yeah.
Right? We're all equally valuable as a human being. And
there's people I don't like that I would jettison pretty quickly.
You would?
I mean, if somebody's an asshole on this small ship, like
oh no, it's not this guy's fault. He didn't do anything. He was knocked out by accident. He wakes up and he's like, I have no idea why I'm here.
Okay.
No clue. He didn't do anything wrong.
No, but I'm saying if there's 4 of you and you're hanging out and somebody's an asshole, it's like, well,
well,
you're voting yourself off the island here, bro.
Yes, and it's a good neo-modern example of that kind of shrinking of a story and making it about an individual narrative, what we can live with. And so when you see these types of movies or TV shows or stories like that, you can put together that we're starting to struggle with this on a grander scale as a people, this idea of narrating life and having a kind of sacred narrative as well. You had mentioned, so where do I see that moving into the next one as well? Okay.
Or I'm not sure if I worded it correctly. Where do you see movies and literature? Like what type of stories would be in neo-romantic times?
You're going to get, I think, 2 kinds again kind of emerge that are similar to romanticism, which is you're going to get these kind of big emotional connections to things. So like romantic literature tends to be about there tends to be 2 kinds. The vastness and emotional connection to things like nature. You have a lot of nature poetry. You also have what are called the dark romantics. People like Byron, Keats, Shelley, Coleridge. Now the dark romantics, which is where I focused a lot of my research, because it leads into early American lit quite a bit. The dark romantics, they were fascinated by a kind of bastardization of enlightenment. What they did is they took a fight to God, and they said, well, you are the superior thought machine. And so we're going to take our kind of problems in thinking and our limitations to rationalize the world around us, why things happen. We're going to take that directly to you. And you know what villain that we tend to see a lot of today emerges out of Romanticism is the mad scientist. The mad scientist. And all the mad scientist is someone who says, I am no longer going to leave it up to God to create. I think I can harness this knowledge and create something. And so in neo-romanticism, I think you're going to see a kind of split of that again. You might end up seeing more of a cohesive discussion on something like climate change in neo-romanticism, because you have a nature element in romanticism. But I also think you're going to have this kind of reaction to deities of authority as well, in both positive ways and negative ways as well. People will worship and scream.
I hope we revisit this in about 20 years. The three of us.
Either Joe is really right or really wrong.
No, it'd be interesting to see.
Well, gentlemen, I was wrong, and I apologize up front.
It's all TikTok dancing shit now.
It's just, clusters of circuses. That's all we live in now. That's it.
It's all 4-second clips. So that's it.
It went from 7 down to 4 seconds. So, Joe, when you said that, when I asked, I think I asked something to the extent of how do we fix the problems in neo-modernism? And you said there may not be a fix. Mm-hmm. By chance, do you think in the either the early 90s, late 80s, do you think there was a Joe of your knowledge of something of your wisdom and caliber?
Kurt Cobain.
No.
Oh, okay.
Well, actually, I don't know. I guess I'll let Joe answer that. Do you think they would have thought that there was no fixing the end of that rubber band for postmodernism into neo-modernism? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say there was a much better, much smarter version of me. And there's a lot of them too. But one that I'll mention for audiences who might be interested, if you read the early 90s works of a gentleman by the name of Charles Taylor, who wrote
sounds very white.
Charles Taylor is fantastic. So you can see his stuff on YouTube even. The Malaise of Modernity. He wrote in 1991, and he even did, you can see on YouTube his early discussions of the problem. Here's what he essentially proposed back in 91. He said, people are upset at the youth back in 1991. People are upset about the youth and how they're developing their own morals that don't seem to jibe with the rest of our constructed group narratives, right? Sounds familiar? Sounds like any day it could be, really. Okay.
Hair metal.
Yeah, I mean, but his argument was this. He said, stop looking at it from an individual perspective of saying they're wrong and not taking their concerns seriously. He said, don't do that. You have to take the fact that they're trying to build a moral landscape seriously, that's a good thing, actually, even though it does have problems. And he does mention those. But his essential argument is you need to still deal with the problem of modernity, which is what we discussed earlier. The problem that we now live in a time when we have the luxury of trying to figure out what does a free, sovereign version of Joe Meyer do with his freedom? How do we deal with this fairly new problem? Because it is still a fairly new problem of this idea of freedom in a country or in a place. And so Taylor, I would argue that Taylor is a very early neo-modern kind of scholar, in that he was starting to see the problems of the breakdown of postmodernism, that this skepticism and individual battles and stuff like that were skirting the real issue of a much larger one, that we still have to try to figure out what freedom means, and how do we live in a society where you have freedoms and I have freedoms, but if you get what you want, chances are I'm not getting what I want.
Oh.
How do we deal with the issue of establishing a free society where that occurs?
Oh, like if I want to play my Metallica really loud, you're not getting the peace and quiet you want?
Yeah. And to a degree, I mean, to a larger scale, right? Who else? Chantal Mouffe, Mouffe, I think, Chantal Mouffe. She talks about this in the Paradox of Democracy, where she says, and this was, I think, 2003, I want to say, she makes the argument that, one, in a pluralistic society, where we always talk about we want a pluralistic society with multiple angles or multiple views on how to run it, right? Mm-hmm. She makes the argument essentially that an antagonistic forces are necessary, actually, to a pluralistic society. So while we continually talk about how much we hate about left and right and this and that, she argues, no, you need that. You need that antagonism, actually, because that helps to balance things out. I would say that she is a kind of neo-modern scholar as well, because she's, again, saying, stop looking at the individual thing and look a little bit larger out at the issues of modernity, of these historical movements that we still haven't even dealt with the first major break, which is this idea of how do we deal with a law. How do we deal with me saying I'm free, but then me agreeing to a law that takes away some of my freedoms? You know how we do that sometimes.
You can't have an abortion in Texas now.
And yet people who voted for it, I mean, there are people who probably voted for that who might have even had, or been with someone who had an abortion.
Oh, hypocrites.
Well, here's the thing. This is Chantal Mouffe's point, and even Charles Taylor's point. Have we really dealt with that level of problem, of schism in ourselves, that I would vote for something that willfully suppresses my freedom? Have we really dealt with it?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're having these arguments still today, right?
Yeah.
So their argument would be, no, we haven't.
Well, there might not be a solution, right? Any freedom has consequences, right?
Yeah. I mean, realistically, right? I mean, and this is what the Enlightenment thinkers were struggling with as well. Going back with Locke and Rousseau and even Jefferson and all of them, they're struggling with this very problem. They're saying, wait, we have to establish we want to establish freedom, and yet we can't really get away from the fact that we have to develop articles that limit freedom in some ways.
Yeah, I would like to drive 100 miles an hour, but it's probably better that we don't all do that.
Yeah. So Rousseau is the most famous for talking about this idea of the general will. One way to do it is we get together, we talk, and we establish a kind of general will that says, okay, collectively, we will say, let's have a speed limit.
Yeah.
And so we've made that discussion collectively, that decision to say, let's have a speed limit. And for Rousseau, that's probably the best way to do it. And you can make the argument that we still do that today, of course, to a degree, but you can also see those very problems that Taylor and Mouffe are talking about, which is we still struggle with it mightily.
Yeah, we all break the speed limit.
Yeah.
Do you think tradition...
Moving right along.
Do you think tradition would be good or bad for neo-modernism? Meaning, Like, actually, I don't even know an example. So do you think
like when we high five each other?
No, like when grandparents tell us to do something, or listening to older ways, those type of traditions?
Yeah, I think those are all, again, those are all connected to narrative reassurance, right? The idea that we should honor those who came before us, and traditions would be another way also of kind of securing narrative, right? Things, we have rites of passages, right? Some people you have bar mitzvahs, you have special ceremonies that people use. Those are all ways to narrate.
Gender reveal parties.
Hey, I mean, maybe that becomes a story, a way of the story. It might.
That's what people are doing these days, right?
Yeah, but it feels like it doesn't have a deeper.
Yeah, you can tell if it's going to have a penis or not.
But there's no,
or a vajayjay.
It didn't choose to have a penis or a vajayjay.
No, but you're telling everybody what's happening in your belly.
It's at least like, say, a bar mitzvah. That's somewhat.
You didn't choose to become an adult in Jewish land.
You didn't do anything to kill yourself, meaning you were responsible enough to eat your breakfast and not get killed by
Wait,
someone.
are you making the case that the bar mitzvah is more meaningful than the gender reveal party?
I kind of am.
I would say
what do you
so,
think, Joseph?
probably. I think there's very much a much longer tradition, obviously, for the bar mitzvah, and there's also
longer is not better.
Yeah, I mean, for some, there's a religious aspect to it as well, connected to it. I think with the gender reveal, that all just goes under the idea of a part of the story, a part of that narrative that people are building, right? Remember the time that we had our gender reveal party, and then the next time you have this other thing. I mean, to me, all of that just falls under the idea of how people want to build that narrative that they want to tell later on in the future. That's it. But I do think tradition will become important, or even more important, at the tail end of neo-modernism, if I'm right about it moving into neo-romanticism.
Are quinceañeras important?
Sure.
They didn't kill themselves. They didn't get themselves
Absolutely.
killed too.
No, but then why are only Mexican kind of people doing it instead of, like, we don't do quinceañeras over here?
No, that's just a cultural. I would think
No, but that means we're missing out on this cool cultural thing.
Well, I see that a lot of paradigms in America. Me being raised in America and then going to visit Vietnam, I see certain cultures where I'm like, wow, that's pretty freaking beautiful that they have those cultural things that we don't have here. Does it make it better? Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Well, so ideally we could look at all cultures and then pick out the good stuff and then have one ultimate culture smorgasbord buffet. Easier
said than done. Some of the cultural context of doing something with respect, and there's good and bad on either side.
So is Christmas our home run? Is that our ultimate culture?
I do love me some Christmas. I will say I do love Christmas. But at the same time, too, you mentioned, why couldn't we pull from each culture in some way? That, and a lot of people today talk about cultural appropriation and why that's a problem.
Yeah.
And that is also a very neo-modern issue, because it has to do with that being a kind of sacred space, and people saying, I don't want you to use that in a way that almost makes it a sacrilege to itself.
Wait, so I shouldn't enjoy stick dancing because I'm not Filipino?
I have no idea.
I don't, but yeah.
You could go live in the Philippines and eventually enjoy that.
Why can't I just do it here?
You can. It's
similar to if you had a double Dutch jump rope, but if you use sticks instead of jump ropes, is the best way I can describe it.
That sounds fantastic. That sounds awesome. I would love to see that.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a Filipino thing. So
yeah, but why would you have to ask yourself the question of why would you do it?
Looks like fun, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm okay with that, with experiencing it and looking at it that way. I'm okay with trying to experience it that way. Is there a religious or major cultural element attached to that? I'm not familiar with it.
Damned if I know. I mean, so what makes it appropriation then? If I just take stuff from other cultures, if I eat burritos every day, why is that bad?
Yeah, this is a genuinely difficult question, because again, it's
Yeah.
my whole thing is, you could spend hours and hours and hours trying to deal with that particular question,
Yeah.
or you can take the step back and look at the fact that, again, this is a problem of narrative and a problem of sacred space. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And now what do you do with that, though? I'm not 100% sure. I couldn't tell you. If I could not sit here and tell you if you want to do, what did you call it? Did you say it was stick
dance? Yeah. Filipino
dancing?
stick dancing. Yeah. I
I'm
didn't make that up. That's a real thing.
Yeah, of course. I'm not. I'm not in any position to tell you what's right or wrong about that, because, to be completely honest with you, I have no idea. I have no clue to how to answer those questions, really. My whole thing is just to see them and to see the questions and try to figure out why the question is there.
Oh, well, but then that implies that there is some cultural appropriation that is not good, that is not acceptable.
There could be.
Okay.
There could be. And that's something that that the larger culture is going to, again, if you want to have that conversation as a culture, you can. That's totally fine. And by the end of that conversation, maybe we figure out, you know what, we don't want to have discussions of appropriation, or maybe we do. I just simply know that I don't have the answer.
Yeah. You know, so I'm half Vietnamese and half Irish American, right? If I see somebody doing something that looks Vietnamese, it doesn't bother me one bit at all. I don't have, I guess I don't have an idea of sacred space. I'm like, if you want to be like a Vietnamese person, go ahead. I mean, whatever that is, right?
For some people, the sacred space is the idea that we need openness.
Yeah.
Is that you? Do you need like supreme openness to be able to kind of discuss anything, talk about anything? There's no taboo topic. Is that like a place for you where you stand?
Do I need that?
Yeah.
I mean, I behave that way. Yeah, I guess.
So then if somebody were to come in and tell you you could no longer talk about X, how would that hit you?
Well, so I would say, I have a lot of personal freedom. I can talk about whatever the fuck I want.
So that's a sacred space for you then.
I'm an obnoxious American. Yeah.
It is. And for a lot of comedians, like we talked about before, that is their sacred space to say, don't tell me that I can't talk about this or that. It's something that you're willing to fight and defend.
Yeah.
If it truly wasn't a big deal to you, you would literally have no care about it at all. And that's a problem that we're dealing with. How do we have these continual, like you and me can have that discussion, and then me and Liem can have that discussion, and you can already see that we end up just going around and round and around.
I don't want you guys talking behind my back.
And we can, as you can see just in our society today in general, you could see how much time we spend on just these micro discussions. And at the end of it, where would we be? Where?
Yeah.
So I would rather simply say, you have your sacred space, and that's great. That's good. I have mine too. And if we don't, as long as we're respectful of that, to have that, I'm not sure we need to have as many micro discussions as we have today.
Oh yeah.
I would add on. So I completely agree that like your
You always side with the guest.
I forget the word that you just used. Like your guys' each bubbles or of
Sacred space.
Sacred space. Sorry, yeah,
Sure.
sacred spaces.
Okay.
So the thing I would add in is when you said respect for sacred spaces, I would take it as far as to really the word respect is really in my opinion, needs to be respected. So meaning, me and Emmett sometimes have these little arguments on, say, my personal sacred space on foods. I may eat something that, to the American nose, they may not like the smell or the texture, and I don't appreciate when I'm sitting there eating, and then someone says, "Oh, that's gross." I find that. So it's one thing that this is my sacred space I'm eating. But then I guess it's their sacred space. They're allowed to say what they want. But then there's not a respect there. There's a breakdown of respect as soon as you start to put down or to say negative things about the things that I enjoy. Now, I know then I could understand how that goes down a slippery slope because...
Go ahead. Keep going. Yep. Take it, because I was going to go there anyway. I was going to go there anyway.
Skittles up your ass.
Well, let's not go there, but let's keep going. Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm trying to think of an example. I can't think of
No, that's a perfect example. That's a perfect example, right?
Well,
go ahead. Keep going.
No, go ahead. I'm
sorry. I got excited because you actually have a fantastic example there. And here's the issue, right? For a lot of people, they would simply say, well, it's just food. It's just food. Who cares? Well, that's an easy one. You care. And here's the problem though, right? Like me and Emmett, in our conversation, what I learned about him is that he does value, whether, it's a sacred space thing or not for him, how he would label it, that's fine. What he values though is at least having a freedom to discuss things. So we could go back and forth and have some sort of, in my opinion, almost useless argument about something. I'm sure we could have some kind of useless argument. Yeah. Or I could simply note that about him, right? For our next interactions and say, oh, I know. Yeah. Emmett really values that idea of openness and being able to speak about something. And Emmett might value something about me that I mentioned about my sacred space. And nobody is upset. You see, this is part of the problem, though. The slippery slope you were talking about is this. If he says to you, oh, that food is disgusting, and you say to him, well, look, I'd really, to me, though, it actually does matter. It's actually really quite important. That's a perfectly good discussion to have. That shouldn't even need to rise to the level of an argument. The two of you should simply just be like, okay, great, we have another understanding here, right? And if we just had those types of discussions, you would not see nearly the amount of arguments that we have today, because then the other person would just simply say, oh, all right, yeah, that's cool, I won't say anything, it's fine. As a matter of fact, tell me a little bit more about it. You might even say, like, what's special about it to you? And now you gain a level of even intimacy that you didn't have. But Liem, if you turn around and say, because he asked that question, I'm going to throw Emmett away completely. That's another problem that we're having, is we're looking at that first interaction as a horrific attack on us, instead of a moment where you might be able to just say, hey, look, let me tell you something. It actually does bother me a little bit. And here's what I'd rather, let me tell you a little bit about why this is important to me. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Well, now I want to know what food we're talking about.
Like say either, I forget, oysters, or like Liem will do chicken feet.
That's true. I don't like oysters.
So, and that's okay. You don't have to.
But it's when you say, oh, that looks disgusting, or why would you eat that? God damn, why would you put that in your mouth? That's where it's like, okay, dude, shut the fuck up.
Why would you chew on this gray booger?
It's stuff like that. Like, you don't need to say that.
But there are other things, right? There are other things, Liem, that Emmett will push back on and you don't care about, right? Like other things that he might say that you're like, whatever, I don't care.
This gets into the deeper friendship. Like,
no, we don't have to go that deep. But
Lamborghinis are definitely better than Ferraris.
I'm assuming though, because you still have the friendship, that there are things that you're just like, whatever, right?
You have not ejected me out of the space capsule.
Yes. No, not yet. Yeah, right. But that's why it's so important. It's important that we understand that this is happening to us today, and it's not just like the three of us. There is historical precedents, reasons for why these conversations are coming up more and more. We're being led to them, and how we deal with them is going to help shape to a degree how this movement continues to run.
Wait, we're getting duped into oyster preference conversations?
Whoa, in some ways I can make a long-winded academic argument here. I am, at the end of the day, I do teach college. I could go there, but it won't be valuable. But I could say, because look, we can look at the other way as well. And we can say, for Emmett, why would Emmett say that? Because in some ways he's trying to also say, that seems odd to me, to my story. And maybe that's getting a little bit too deep, but at the same time, you could make an interesting, maybe not for this specific example, but you could see how two people in that situation would be arguing for their own narrative and to try to see who can win out. can I make you stop eating the oyster so that I don't have to see that as part of my narrative? And you're saying, can I get you to stop saying these negative things about my food so that I can control my narrative? Gentlemen,
my story
welcome
doesn't want
to
you eating
neo-modernism.
oysters. Oh, yeah.
This is it. This is the neo-modern problem.
These are our biggest problems. Jesus. We're in trouble.
Yes. This is, look, I'm not exactly 100% optimistic here. Look, modernism, just to clean this up, because people might want to know, modernism, which is where this comes from, kind of based on or attached to, was a horrible movement. Horribly depressing and dank. And we shrunk the human being inside itself so much that it was incredibly rife with violence and solitude. And I mean, so yeah, I hate to say it, but this could even get worse.
I'll tell you this, Joseph and Liem, if we, the three of us, were on a space capsule and all we had to eat was fucking oysters and chicken feet, and we found a stowaway, I would eject that fourth person immediately and keep you guys. That's how I feel.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you were going to eat the person.
Oh, you're right. We're throwing away valuable food.
I thought you were going to say we're eating the fourth person.
We did touch on cannibalism, yeah. I'm totally okay with, no, I'm not totally okay with cannibalism.
No.
I'm not okay with elective cannibalism.
No. If it's spontaneous, then it's fine, but not elected. You can't.
Yeah. If you have some trapped in the Andes situation, I don't have a problem with it.
Oh, no, that's a great movie. It's a great movie and a horrible story. But yes.
Yeah. I heard that Reno is populated by the people who made it through the Donner Pass. If you're ever wondering why people in that's, I heard. I haven't looked it up, but that seems correct. There's no I have no backup for that story, but if you're ever in Reno, just remember it was founded by the Successful Cannibals.
Okay. That sounds like a good band, the Successful Cannibals, right? Because they're there, so they were obviously successful.
Still alive, bro. Awesome. Well, I like how it took us 2 hours to get to this point. This is the gold we've been digging for.
So maybe making a point quite obvious, but I'll just kind of say it. So do you think these labels, and then I think at one point way earlier you mentioned the back in, was it the 1920s and 40s, what humans in society needed to get by. The issues that we have nowadays seem to be so much
trivial.
Yes, that's probably the exact
first world problems.
Yeah. So do you think just that our society's grown so much and we have so many good, everything's so easy to us that these issues are just, it's exactly a reflection of that?
No, actually, a short answer I'll say is no. I don't think that it is about triviality, actually, because I think that
I was not expecting that answer.
I know you weren't. And this is look, we talk about the greatest generation being that generation who grew up through modernism. And they're great, not because they chose to be, but they were born into that and they were forged out of it. And that's where their source of greatness comes from, is that they made it through and dealt with horrible things like the Depression, World War I, right? The crash, stock market crash, all these different things that happened. I don't necessarily see our problems today as being trivial, because I think that they're issues that we've been struggling with still for a long time. And that doesn't make them trivial. It just makes them our problems. 100 years from now, that group of people is going to have their own problems to deal with, whether it's as more easily definable as something like war, or whether it's something like trying to figure out a social dilemma. There's still going to be important problems that they have to figure out. And that I would say that the problems we're seeing today are not trivial, because they very, very well could lead us down a path of destruction.
Whoa, wait. I was with you until path of destruction.
Well, yeah, sure. Because think about this, right? If we continue to create a society that loves their own narrative so much and defends it so much, you can start to see how we will continually pull further and further apart from each other. And our entire species, is successful because of our cooperation. That's really why. And I see no reason to believe that if all of a sudden you took that cooperation level away, we would somehow be just fine. I think you could make irreparable damage to us as a species psychologically if we continue to go that path.
Well, luckily we still have China around.
Well, we're lucky that we just have, in some ways we're lucky we have cat videos, because that makes us happy.
That will unify us?
The cat and dog videos make us happy enough to say, hey, did you see this cute puppy video, right? We're not arguing over puppy videos.
I don't care for them too much.
That's crazy. Cat videos, China, Trump, cults.
Wait, why do you got to bring Trump in here?
It's all part of this era.
Yeah. Okay. So, is there a caricature of a person today that is so self-invested? I'm so special. The only thing that matters is my feelings. This whole world is conspiring against me. And why doesn't anybody listen to me? Why doesn't anybody want to use the things that I want to produce? Is there, I think I kind of have a view of like, hey, shut the fuck up. Like, get with the program. Like, get a job. Be cool. You're not special. It's fine. We're all special. Okay, yeah, get a job. Like, we have to go to work and pay our bills, and I gotta be a good citizen. Otherwise, I'm gonna end up in jail. Like, relax, stop crying. Does that fit into the perspective that you're bringing upon these ages?
What I would say to that person is I would say, listen, you're drifting away without even realizing it. You're drifting away from humanity in this perspective of saying that my problems have never been felt before. And what I would say to people today is, more than ever, you want to reconnect with humanity, and specifically even historically, and say that the suffering that you feel or the depth of loneliness has been felt before for thousands of years of other humans. That's not to take away what they're feeling. It's actually to amplify the seriousness of it, and to also give a little bit of hope to say there have been, billions of people who have felt this and have moved forward. You can also be a part of that story of moving forward. But we've disconnected so much from I think, a collective narrative in search of these individual narratives in neo-modernism, that we run that risk of looking at our problems as being so unique. So for a quick example, people love to say social media, right, has changed everything. Social media is this and it's that. And I don't have that view. I don't. To me, social media is just another tool that highlights the problems that we've always had. That's it. It just highlights and amplifies them in a different way. And so if you take that power away from social media and stop saying that it is this entity, and instead say, it's you, it's me, it's everyone, you then put the onus on each other to say, how do we want to interact with each other? I'm not on Twitter and I'm not on Facebook because I want to maintain healthy, good relationships with humanity, even with people I don't know. Because those, to me, a lot of times those platforms, they end up leading us to a path of reactionary thinking and reactionary typing and communication and stuff like that. And I have chosen very consciously, I don't want to be a part of that.
So this implies that you do have an Instagram.
No, I don't. I don't have an Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn, but that is I'm okay with that, because when I checked it out, it's kind of slow moving. It's a kind of a slow moving more thing. And
if
so
Facebook's too fast for you, jump onto LinkedIn.
That's a good one. I like that one. Those Facebooks are a little too fast for me. Yeah. But I just, to me, it was different. LinkedIn's a little bit different in that regard. I do. Maybe it's the more businessy aspect to it, that it's more about kind of cultivating a business presence a little bit more. And so people are very careful about how they create their LinkedIn persona.
That means it's fake.
Yeah, but you know what though, Emmett, is that a bad thing?
Yeah, I don't want to
Is that a
see
bad
fake
thing?
people in their suits. I
No,
wanna
no,
see
no.
the
But
real.
there's a fakeness. There's a LinkedIn fakeness that's been a part of the business world forever.
Yeah.
And there is a kind of, what's their Instagrammy / any Snapchatty fakeness
Yeah.
that is very new and very different to us in a lot of ways. Those are not the same fakenesses.
So I shared some video of my charcuterie board party with my beautiful sangria pot. Well, the jug of sangria. And that was what I wanted to share. I wanted people to see that. Is that weird? Or, I mean, is that dysfunctional in some way?
Where'd you share it? What platform?
On the Instagram and the Facebook.
On the Instagram and Facebook. Okay.
Yes.
Why'd you do it?
Because it was something I was enjoying, and I wanted other people to enjoy the image of it.
Yes, but why did you want them to enjoy you enjoying it? Because you're narrating a story, whether we want to believe this or not. You are cultivating a story on these platforms as well. So what is it that you wanted to highlight of your story?
I believe because most of the people that I'm in contact with, overwhelmingly, are people that I actually know in some way, and that I've spent some time with them, and I want to share that experience with them. But I also want to remind them, hey, I'm your friend. I do normal stuff. Here's some fun stuff to look at. This is what my life is doing right now. It's not a mundane thing. It's a special, joyous moment of like, hey, I have a bunch of charcuterie and some sangria. Like, here, check it out. Isn't this fun for you to watch? And to have them think of me positively, like, oh, there's Emmett. He's having fun. He's a fun guy.
Yeah, and if somebody were to ask you about it, right, you'd be completely open to answering questions about it, right? Like, why did you do it this way? What was your choice for this? You'd be like, yeah, okay, that's great. Yeah, so all you're doing there is opening yourself up for conversation. That's human. That's just human. That's it.
I have a thought that was connected to earlier, and I'm forgetting why I was thinking it. But anyways, I'll just say it anyways. And I think I'm going to walk myself into a field of landmines, perhaps.
Go for it.
Anyway, so I think of...
Put on your heavy boots.
Put on your heavy boots. And then also on both you guys respond to this, however, in your perspective with neo-modernism and or your literature background, perhaps, if that connects. So I think of a lot of the situations like a pendulum, Black Lives Matters, and then my the recent one that I thought of was the Asian hate crimes that I was kind of fearful of, or I was more so watching the news to be informed on in case I need to be careful of it. And then like from Emmett's perspective at the time, he was kind of like, well, is there just more news of it? Was there the same amount of Asian hate crimes before? So I think of the pendulum as probably in the past, maybe this is where the field of landmines is. Maybe white people had so much more privilege. And now if the pendulum is swinging back and maybe too far where either Black Lives Matter or more news on Asian hate crimes due to COVID, I think of it, for me, I was thinking that pendulum, go ahead and swing it far the other way, because we need to know where the too far is so we could come back and find a good medium ground, a neutral ground for your podcast.
Yes,
so,
exactly. Yeah, it's true.
What are your guys' kind of thoughts on that? I feel like we need to have that pendulum, but...
First? Oh, go ahead. Go, please.
Yeah, you go first.
Sorry, you both looked at me at the exact same time, and I was like, oh, I'm on. All right.
You're on.
What I'll say to that is this. Again, I'm going to look at this just from the perspective of historical movement. And what I'm going to say is what I see is Black Lives Matter as a means of trying to own a narrative and trying to shape a narrative that's important to them, to that idea. And the idea being that if they can create that narrative and can own it, at the end of it, there's going to be a kind of clarity. Because again, narratives are constructed for clarity purposes more than anything. So if they can construct that narrative of Black Lives Matter and own it, they believe that they're going to find a sense of clarity at the end, and that's what they're looking for. And when you mention the Asian hate crime, what is the real concern behind that is that there is going to be a growth of a narrative that it's okay to inflict harm or violence on the Asian community, right? So people talk about the statistics, and we have major problems these days narrating statistics. So you might be right, or someone might be right in saying that the statistics themselves don't bear out that there's more crimes against Asians today than in the past. That could be correct, but that's not really, I would argue, where the concern is coming from. The concern is that there could be the emergence of a dominant narrative that says that it's okay to do this. Again, a neo-modern problem.
Yeah, me personally, I don't have that complex of a view on these sort of things. To me, I would like to think that I approach everything kind of rationally and logically, of like, yeah, of course skin color shouldn't matter. Of course you shouldn't unjustly hurt another group for any reason. You know, these are very simple things. Like, we should really, you know, why can't we treat everybody equally and well? Why can't every person be treated well? You know, I don't want our police to be choking anybody. I mean, they have a tough job. Sometimes it requires violence, but ideally we want great cops that can do a great job. You know, it's flawed. I wish it was better. How do we make it better? Right. So those are the kind of approaches and thoughts that I have towards it. I would, you know, for Asian hate crimes, I don't want that to happen. I don't want anybody to have any hate crimes. But I do question, like, if there's just a bunch of news stories about it now, then that to me seems like a concocted story, as opposed to if you were to look at the statistics and go, hey, look, crime's kind of the same all around, but you can report it in different ways to make people feel a different story. And I think you're kind of hinting at the story is important, whereas I'm saying, well, shouldn't the statistics be more important? Shouldn't the reality and the data be the basis for all of our decisions and actions? And then I realized, yeah, people don't work that way. They're emotional and psychological and irrational.
It's not even just the irrational part. I'll give you a rational part here, right?
Yeah.
So people like,
what do you mean those
Lomberg,
people?
Bjorn Lomberg, and I think Steven Pinker, they talk a lot about how, statistically speaking, this is the safest that the world has ever been for someone to be born into. This is the most likely of times for someone to be successful and have a wonderful existence. That's statistically, they can prove it in a sense.
Yeah.
Great. Now, how do those statistics, though, help the individual person who is suffering still? That's a human problem.
Yeah.
That, again, this is not about, people are going to hear that and they're going to think that, oh, well, this guy's anti-statistics and anti-rationale. Nope. I want to be very clear about this. What I'm saying is we have to start clarifying problems, and we have to start clarifying when we're chasing the wrong discussion points. Mm-hmm. So it is great that the statistics are showing a vast improvement in terms of our ways of living and our ability to be safe and all that stuff. That's wonderful. But the person who is in a horrible condition, that still does nothing for them. As a matter of fact, you can even make the argument that it becomes pure mockery at a certain point. This is the greatest time to live in. Why can't you be great?
You mean like if somebody's sitting at home depressed instead of out enjoying this world? Or
no, I want to be very clear. I'm saying you've got statistics proving that this is the greatest time to live in terms of just pure safety and health.
Yeah.
And you have people, though, still, those statistics do not in any meaningful way engage the individual who is suffering, in no way. And I'm never quite sure. This is why I say we have a problem. It's still I keep saying this, and I'm sorry for repeating this constantly.
What's the problem?
Forgive me. This is all still just a neo-modern problem of narrative, because what is the narrative that is being sold by the statistic? The narrative that has been constantly said and beaten over our heads is we should feel privileged that we live in this time. That is sort of the narrative that's being told. It's safe. It's wonderful. But the other people who are suffering have their narratives. And their narratives say, my life is horrid and horrible. What do we do with these two narratives that are, by the way, equally true? We tend to use narratives like weapons today, and that's the problem. And when you butt two truthful narratives into each other, we have no mechanisms in place to know what to do with those two truths. That's the real problem.
But I think they're separate, because overall things are great, and individually some people are suffering. I'm not at all against helping people that are suffering. I would love to. If we could help everybody that's suffering, I'm all for it, right?
But Emmett, they're used against each other. That's the problem. That's why I'm saying it's an issue. I believe everything you just said. Yeah. That you see the rationalization of there is, I'll even go as far as to say there's absolutely a useful, that there's use in the statistics, because there's a way of seeing a measurement of civilization, let's say. But the way we use it as a narrative becomes a kind of weapon against other narratives. It's the point of the statistics of the Asian hate crimes, which is to say that the one narrative says statistically, this is a not a big issue. Yeah. And yet the other narratives are saying, well, wait a second, the fact that it's here and the fact that we're worried that it could become something, that is a narrative. When you put the two together, we still have no mechanism for how to really separate that out and simultaneously validate both narratives, not as weapons.
Oh, yeah. I would say definitely don't hate Asians.
Yeah. Seems pretty simple, doesn't it? At the end of the day.
Let me ask you this personal question. No, I'm kidding. Would you, if you could choose to live in any prior time, would you choose to travel to some other time and live your life there as opposed to this day and age today?
No. I love my life right now. I love it now. And here's the thing. This is where we have to get to. We have, because we've weaponized narrative and rhetoric, right? Language. It seems like, oh, didn't you just undercut your own argument? And I would tell you, no, I didn't. No. I can hold in my mind that this likely is the best time. I can believe the data and say this is the safest time to be in and say that's great. But I can also at the same time validate that person's struggle and say, you are struggling. And I believe that, and that's real.
But they're not struggling because the world is great. They're struggling because something's not great for them, right?
Yes, but think about how it sounds either way. How do you feel that this dominant narrative, this narrative is out there that's saying this is the greatest time to live? And you're telling me as a human being on a human level that that's not going to mess with your head, that your life is terrible amid the greatest time to live? Again, how we narrate our existence matters. And that little piece of information that says that this is the greatest time to live, that is going to impinge on that narrative. And you might get people questioning, what is wrong with me? Yeah. And so do they have a means of getting out even? Do they?
Well, if things are so fluid and narrative based, could any person make up their own story and believe it and just feel great?
Sure. You could have a person who you mean like develop a fictionalized version of themselves. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think you kind of hinted at it with therapy with soldiers returning from war, right? If you can paint your story in a light that is positive instead of negative, is that
they're trying. Narrative therapy is trying to make sense of the fractured memories of what's happening. And Emmett, I think we do that all the time. Yeah. There are times when we ourselves have to narrate the reason to get the hell up out of bed.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a real thing when we self-narrate to say, look, I don't want to do this thing, but I'm going to do it because people are relying on me and because of this. Narrative is that strong.
The spam's not going to fry itself.
Nope, never has. And if it does, maybe it's time to leave that kitchen.
How are we doing here on the podcast?
We are going to go into the final questions.
Sure.
Dun, 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 dun.
First question. What great daily habit or habits do you have?
You know, when I first wake up, you know, I make my coffee, the coffee spoons, I'll go downstairs and I'll go down here and I'll just be quiet and I'll just kind of, I like the silence and I like to just have those moments to reflect and clarify things as simple as like, why am I up? What do I need to do today? What is the point? I think it's very important that we have these quiet moments to clarify and reflect on what our purpose is.
Is that like meditation?
You can make an argument that I guess it's kind of, it could be. Yeah, it could be a kind of, I guess.
Joseph, have you read all of the books that we see behind you?
Oh, not at all.
Okay.
No. You know, what happens when you're an academic, you know, what happens is people tell you about have you read so-and-so? And have you read so-and-so? And you're like, oh, yeah. Meanwhile, you're lying. And you're like, then you feel guilty. And so you look to try to get the book, or sometimes people will give you books for free because they're like, you like to read. Here's a gift of a book. So between between the gifts and I've read a bunch of them. I've read a whole bunch of them, but I can't say I've read all of them. Not at all. No.
So like 80%?
Sure. Let's go with that. That sounds like a great number to land on.
I know you're trying to wrap up, but I actually had two burning questions. One is that when I think of literature, I think of written books, right? During our discussion here, we talked about movies a lot. Do movies count as a continuation of literature, or because people ain't reading like they used to, right?
Yeah, it's kind of weird though. I'll ask my students every so often, like, is anybody reading any books? And you'd be surprised at how many young people are actually reading. And I mean, that's great because we interact with that information differently than we do a movie or a TV show. We just do naturally. But to me, it's all about story. Give me a great story. I love The Mandalorian. I love, those, to me, it's all about narrative. So yeah, I'll take the great narratives wherever I can get them.
I bet you're in a selective population of people that read more than not.
Probably. That is probably true. I probably read more than the average.
But I mean, all the young people you're talking to are the readers, right? The non-readers are.
No, I have freshmen who are comp science majors, bio. They're not literature. I teach in a program called the Writing and Critical Inquiry program. And that we get a lot of like incoming freshmen, and they come from all over the place. And so this is a pretty broad like group. And I'm just finding a lot more young people reading than the previous generation even.
Well, but what I mean is these are all people that are going to college, right?
Fair point. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. The other burning question I had was, have you seen the Korean movie Parasite?
I have.
Okay. What did you think of that story?
I thought it was, I liked the story a lot. The execution was really well done. It reminded me of a Shakespearean kind of story. With
that it got gruesome.
Well, because it was very human. It was a very human kind of, the way they interacted was believable. Like and yet there was also there's a kind of tragedy to it, of course. Yeah. Right. I mean, I saw it when it came out, so it's been a little while, but you felt for the family. Because it just
felt bad for everybody in the movie,
you just felt like it was a supreme tragedy, or maybe a Greek tragedy is a better example, where you just feel like we all lost. Yes. Everybody loses in this story. That's more Greek than anything else. So yeah.
Okay. Sorry to hold up the closing here.
No, that's fine.
Next question: what do you know or think of cryptocurrency?
So I have an associate degree in computer science. There was a time when I was offered a lovely job to go programming, and I turned it down.
Sucker.
This was back in 2001 or two, back when you only really needed an associate degree. As if you're a good coder, you were good.
Yeah.
People would hire you. I mean, it's still kind of true. It's a very meritocracy kind of based thing today, even still. And so I remember when cryptocurrency, when mining started and all that stuff. And I remember because I was building my own PCs at the time, and just the power consumption alone and the need for such a high-end GPU, graphics processor unit, and all of that stuff. I mean, I was gaming a little bit, so I had a pretty good GPU and stuff, but doing the calculations and trying to learn what it was about, the shared processing of it, I remember thinking, I don't think I know enough to really understand how to get into this. And I certainly didn't have the money to upgrade everything to do it. I don't. So I have a little bit of a background in understanding it, and even understanding the algorithms for making it what it is. Yeah. I'm very neutral on it, like really neutral, in that I have my concerns from my past in programming about things created digitally and then possibly being manipulated as well, even as secure as it is. But at the same time, it might solve a lot of problems that we have in terms of fiat currency and not having a strong backing as well. So I'm really in the middle.
I'm on the far end of I'm for, because I'm a software engineer.
You would know better than me, even then. Yes.
There's the human side, which you mentioned, where there could be manipulation and whatnot, and that's something I hope blockchain will. It's like having a hammer and you got some nails and somebody doesn't use the hammer. It's the perfect tool for the job. But humans, are they going to pick up that hammer? Are they too stuck on current government? Are they too stuck on banks? That's a problem that could happen, but I think the nature of blockchain, where it can't be deleted, destroyed, or erased, I think that it has time on its side, but I don't have time on my side, meaning I want this to go parabolic before I expire.
Good point. That's a great point. You're right. Absolutely.
I'm fearful that it'll take a long time for humans to adopt it, but I would say with the internet, Google, Facebook, all this adoption, cell phones, smartphones, everything is moving so light speed. It feels like blockchain is going to be earlier than later, I hope. There's one podcast we did with Dr. Milo Simic, and he said that he thinks biological warfare will happen before adoption of blockchain.
You thought I was negative.
And that's a guy that's curing brain cancer.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
By any chance, is there any questions in your mind when you think about blockchain, cryptocurrency, just any things that pops up from time to time?
Is there anything Liem could do to talk you into it right now?
Yes.
What can I tell you? Can I get you into blockchain? No, I don't have questions so much, because I think, like you, there's a sense of I'll say it this way. I think it seems to me like momentum might be leading down that pathway anyway, in general. It just is, to me, a little bit. When that happens, like you, I'm thinking I'm going to be long dead. I think when that happens, maybe not long dead, but probably dead. I mean, like really super mainstream, where you have governments backing it and all of that stuff. So I'm not sure what to do with it on a human level. Almost, I don't know. Like,
buy some.
Okay, so that I was actually going to go into that. I do think so. My theory, I don't have enough quantitative data to back this up. I believe like we're at less than 1% of adoption. So I don't even know, 0.02%, 0.05, whatever the percentage is, pretty low. So I hope within all three of our lifetimes, as long as we make it past, we've already made it past quinceañera age and the
quinceañeras, yeah.
Earlier the conversation about not dying before those ages, but I theorize in our lifetime those multipliers should be able to happen. Now, where I do kind of agree, maybe mass adoption, I fear that might be out of our lifetime. But what is within reach in our lifetime, I hope and I think is true, is that multiplier if you buy some now. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm a dumb shit. I don't. This is not financial advice, but
right.
my opinion is if you buy some now and within our lifetime, I do think that it'll multiply where it is the best investment that you will have. Like even if it 10x's, 100x, that's more than you can make buying houses. Emmett's a realtor, and
my degree's in accounting.
There you go. You know then, yeah.
Just the way I see it is that for the average Joe, the regular, the average guy.
I'm an average Joe, so that's fine.
An average guy working a job. We don't have a ton of money after we pay our bills. So if you're going to invest in stuff, there's really 3 appreciating assets that normal people can buy. Your primary residence is probably the best one. If you can buy your house, then that's great. You'll make out. You'll do well. Stocks. The stock market has a long history of if you buy stocks and hold on to them, they'll probably go up, right? And then cryptocurrency is very new, but also appears to generally appreciate in value. It's super volatile, so it goes way up and down. But over any stretch of time, it appears to go way up, way faster than those other 2 categories of appreciating assets. So if you're interested in buying something that will be worth a lot more in the future, then that seems like the best bet to me. Whether you, Joseph, or any of our listeners goes out and buys some today or never, it doesn't change my situation at all. So I'm not talking anybody into doing it because I'm trying to pump it or trying to get more people in. It's just, I like you. And if you have like $1,000 that might be worth a lot more in the future, would you put it into that as opposed to somewhere else? And that's kind of how I look at it. I would recommend anybody, if you like more money than you have now, then whatever money you got set aside, you can put it into a place where it might multiply.
Maybe a disclaimer for fun. Back in 2016 was when the light bulb for me with blockchain went off, because I didn't quite understand RSA encryption, SHA-256. That was when the light bulb went off, where I was like, holy shit, this security is possible, and a paradigm shift of decentralized trusted data, not just money, trusted data, the foundation of everything, or could be the foundation of many things, not absolutely everything, but nearly everything, can change the world. At that time, I told Emmett, we talked about it for a couple months, and then we finally put some money into it. But I think hopefully that little segment, I'm really for cryptocurrency and blockchain, and I don't think Emmett is not an easy person to persuade in any way. So his thoughts are his own, really, even though in 2016, I said, hey, what is this cryptocurrency stuff? Looks like it's really freaking powerful. And Emmett concluded his own thing. So anyways, we happen to be on the same page, but
sure,
not from the same angle.
Yeah. Actually very different. Very different, because I'm actually more sci-fi-ish. Like, I think this blockchain stuff I think it could be governance from a political, geopolitical standpoint, or a nation. It could be. Now, that is probably beyond our lifetime. I hope it happens within my lifetime to see it, but I don't think it will happen in our lifetime, but I think it will happen.
Yeah, it seems to be going that. I think eventually it's going to go that way. It's going to.
But can you put a narrative on a blockchain?
On a blockchain?
2016, right? You just did. Back in 2016, here comes the narrative, right? It's
that was
true.
The day.
Yeah.
All right, next question. What's the biggest problem for humans? What should we do to fix it?
Oysters. Fucking oysters.
The biggest problem for humans, I will say, I'm gonna go out and say the potential pull towards solitude and away from each other. There is such a hard pull these days, for so many reasons, to just be more and more isolated from each other. And I can't help but think in reality that can only make things worse in general for us. So to people, I would simply say, every so often, 1 out of every 10 times even, let's say, the time when you say to yourself, I'm not going to go hang out with this person or that friend. Just kind of force yourself if you have to, because you never know. It might not even be about you in that moment. It might be that they need you for that. Just go. And even if you just sit there with them together and just listen and joke and all that stuff, you might find that you needed it and that they needed it a lot more than you ever knew.
I really admire that answer, because usually people point to like global warming or something, but
that's probably been half the guess out of 60
Really?
something guess.
Yeah. But if we self-destruct through isolation, that's fucking terrible too.
Because it all connects with those problems anyway, to me.
Yeah.
It all does, right? Why can't we come to some kind of consensus on any of this stuff? Because we've got our narratives, we're closing them off from each other, and we don't want to. We want to be isolated in some ways, and that is a major growing concern to me.
Is that what is behind the growing? I hear a lot. So I run a meetup group also, and it's entirely social. Like, let's go out and have fun. Let's go to the coffee shop. Let's go happy hour. And it's entirely social, but I get a lot of stories, people telling me they have social anxiety. And I see that a lot in America. People have social anxiety. And when I was a kid, when I was a young adult, that wasn't a thing. It was like, don't be a nerd. Get out and go to the party, right? Is putting a label on it making it real, or is this a side effect of the isolation that you're talking about? Or what is social anxiety from your perspective? Because it wasn't there when I was younger.
I think you're onto something when you say that in some ways, even though the definition, let's say, of social anxiety stays the same, how we label it and how we approach it very much shifts with time. And today, I might say why we're seeing increased social anxiety is twofold. Yeah. One, because we so desperately, I think, want the interaction to be meaningful that we're afraid that if we go and do the meetup, that instead I'm going to have a bad time and plunge myself further into despair. Now, if you think about that, you might think, wait, that doesn't quite make sense. But no, in actuality, it does. Some people would rather be comfortable with the story in their mind that I'm just happy that I could have gone and I was invited, but I don't want to take the risk of going there and having a bad experience, which can happen. It can. And we tend to think more of the bad things. We value bad things a lot more than we value good.
Yeah, that fits entirely with the statistic that my meetup group has 5,000 plus members. I get probably 10 requests a day for new members, and I throw events and maybe 20 or 30 people show up, and that's really good for meetup in Las Vegas. Most events you got like 8 people on a good event, and the staggering statistic of that is like, well, shit, if only the new people showed up, it'd be a fucking blowout everywhere I went. So it's weird to me that these people create profiles, sign up for events, they don't show up, or they cancel, or they flake out, or they find some reason. And to me, it's like, well, there's a much easier way to not go anywhere. And don't do any of that. Just skip it and do whatever the fuck else you were doing.
Yeah, but what do they get? What do they get out of clicking that button?
Yeah, like you said, did they get the invite?
Absolutely. They get their story and they get to say, I'm a part of a meetup. I'm a part of a group. And you know what? I bet you in some weird way, I bet you if you ask them, send out this poll. If you ask them, do you value being a part of that group? And are your experiences largely positive with it? I bet you they would say, yes, I do value it. And yes, it's largely positive, even though they have never been to a single meetup.
Yeah.
Because in their minds, nothing bad has happened. It's not that something good has happened. It's that nothing bad has happened.
Yeah.
That is a really weird psychology about humanity that we've known for a long time.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you shared that because it makes me hate my no-show members less.
Good. You should hate them less, I suppose. But it's a
or
it's a
despise.
problem.
Maybe despise is the right word.
It's a real problem, though, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know what you might do just for the heck of it. Try to, because like I haven't used Meetup in a long time, but you can message them, right?
Yeah.
And you can send out. Could you think of wording the message as a highly probable positive response, or as a supportive mechanism, like in some way that might not so much selling a good time, because again, we don't, the good time is too risky to sell that. But if you're selling that it's a supportive event that is almost guaranteed to, I don't even know how to say this right, because it's
there's no bad outcome.
I mean, that's where I would, just for the heck of it, I would try it and see if you get more people.
Yeah.
And then you'll have your answer. Then you can say it on the podcast. I'd be curious.
Yeah, but then I got a gang of all these people that need to be coddled and supported. This is probably good why I'm not a professor. It's good. Good that I'm not around children.
I'm going to throw in something connected to your isolation message earlier, and correct me if I'm remembering this incorrectly. We had a guest on here, a hypnotist by the name of J. Robert Parker, and he mentioned psychologically his either personal studies or research, I think it's personal studies. He said humans we psychologically would be better off in groups of 50 to 200. So therefore moving away from cities and into smaller towns of around 50 to 200. I forget the number that he said. And that would be psychologically better for everyone. Your isolation thing, does it connect with that? Is that,
it does and it doesn't, because these are things that happen because of reactions to events. So you'll have flights from cities, and then you'll have flights to cities, and then you'll have flights to urban and flights to suburban. All of these are just simply the reactions of the movements of time and trying to readjust for what we feel like we're lacking and what we currently need. So if we ever do come to a consensus, let's say at the tail end of this movement, that we sorely lack intimacy with the population, then we're going to be moving back to the cities, because in the cities you bump into people all the time, and we may not consider that to be intimate connections. But if you ask anybody who's lived in a major city, they'll tell you, oh yeah, no, it actually is. Like you get to know people, you say hi to people, all this stuff all the time. If we get tired and burned out from each other, that's when you get the flights to spaced out suburbs, where you can start to carve out how much interaction you want. So I would say it very much just depends on where we are as a people.
Yeah, right now everybody wants to go to Austin and Nashville. It's the paradox of big city, small town. They want it all in one place.
People left the cities fairly recently, and in our lifetimes, they'll move back.
Yeah.
That happens pretty quickly. We readjust to that pretty quickly.
Yeah. My girlfriend says she wishes she lived in a walkable city, right? A lot of people yearn for that. Where everything's close.
Yeah. No, I mentioned on quite a few podcasts where I watched a short documentary called, I think it was called Strong City, I think.
Yeah.
I forget the name of it but it's built where our current cities built in debt before the city even starts building roads, big roads for cars and then the cars travel as far for work, and it centralizes homes away from business, and it really breaks down things for being able to walk, having a bike. That breaks a city unit down in many ways, and it's not good for humans, supposedly. That's their standpoint in that short documentary.
That's why I bought a bigger truck. Giant roads.
There you go.
Next question. What's your favorite food or dish?
Lasagna. I love me some lasagna. Give me some good meat lasagna. Stack it with cheese and noodles and all that stuff. I could eat that every day.
Would you be culturally offended if I disliked your lasagna?
No, it just leaves more for me. One fewer person out there to take my lasagna, Emmett.
What if Emmett said your lasagna is disgusting?
Yeah, that's fine.
No, I like lasagna. Ricotta.
Lasagna is not my sacred space, so that's fine. Yeah,
I
sure.
don't like ricotta.
Oh, that's it. Now we're done.
All right. Last question. Think of at least 2 friends that should do this conversation. Call them out.
Oh, who would you like to see have this ridiculous talk?
You mean like people that I know, really?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
because there are people that I think would be fascinating to see sit down here.
Oh, no, somebody you know. We can't get Morgan Freeman.
Oh, that was my number 3. All right. Okay.
Well, I'll take 2 of your friends, and then you can name off the other people that you think would be super interesting that we may not be able to get.
Yeah, I mean, I have a friend who I've known for 34 years. We've been friends 34 years. Dr. Raymond Crooks. He got his PhD from the University of Columbia in like God, what is it called? He's got one of those focuses that's always difficult for me to nail down.
Obscure?
He studies data. He's kind of a data scientist in a lot of ways, but more specifically focused on decision making to a degree.
Oh.
And it would be fascinating. I'm always interested, in hearing him. I've been listening to him for 34 years, and I still find him interesting. And then
Raymond.
I think probably I have another friend who I've known for like 28, 30, maybe 30 years now, 30 years also, Justin Benjamin, who did a dual major at Columbia in business and music. And he's just always been, to me, the smartest person in the room, but yet never carried himself that way. Just absolutely brilliant. Amazing.
Is he in the
guy.
music business?
He is. He is still. But it's rough. It's a rough, business. But he's absolutely brilliant. Always has been. I mean, he could, since we were kids. Since we were little, he could go in he's that kid who could go into a test not having a single lesson and somehow get a 98. And you'd be like, how did you do that?
Damn.
You weren't even here for the lessons. What the heck? The rest of us are struggling for our 70s.
Yeah.
He's just brilliant. And he would be, he's always interesting too.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And then what guests did you think that we couldn't obtain, but just kind of you thought would be super interesting? I'm kind of curious to know that.
Scarlett Johansson.
Hey, why not?
Just
sure.
Stare at her the whole time.
She's interesting too.
So superficial.
I would think. I think you could have a lot of fun with Robert Downey Jr. Because I think he could move with you both, right? Because you want someone with energy who can stop, readjust, and move with you, because there's a lot of really good flowing energy in this podcast, right? Like you don't just sit there and say like, go ahead and talk, right? Like it's like you cut in with good questions. So you need someone who can handle that and kind of move with life, as opposed to, like Sam Harris we brought up before. I think Sam might get frustrated with that because he kind of wants the stage because he can speak so intelligently. He'd want to be heard. So I would say I would say Downey Jr. would be fantastic.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
Awesome. All right. I think that was the last question. So actually, plug yourself. So you do your podcast. What's the name of it, and how can people find you?
So the name of my podcast is the Neutral Ground Podcast, and you can go to theneutralgroundpodcast.com to get more information and to start listening to episodes. It's also up on Spotify, Apple, all that stuff, all that good stuff. And the whole point of me starting the podcast was to start to talk a bit about these historical movements and how they kind of impact the way we work with each other, but also to create a space where we can meet in the middle and not worry about extreme arguments, extreme ideas. Instead, let's just focus on the human experience, the things that tie us all together still, because it might sound hokey, but at the end of the day, we have always, for thousands of years, have had to struggle to find our way back to the middle, to meet on something. And I'm just trying to create the space for today for us to do that.
That's awesome. Perfect.
So we can all live together intellectually?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we'll separate again and do it all over again in 200 years.
See you in Nashville.
Do you happen to have a cup with you?
I have a Coke Zero.
Joe, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for spending 3 hours with us. Everyone, audience, you should check out his podcast that he just mentioned, The Neutral Ground. And thank you again, Joe. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, you.
Joe. Yeah,
it was
good
wonderful.
Talk.
All right, we'll
Cheers.
see you soon.
Thank you, guys.